So the backstory for this is that I wrote an article about why I think trans women are women and trans men are men. And David, should I call you David? Is that
Yeah,
that
sure.
he wrote an article critical of it. I wrote a reply, and then he wrote a reply in Substack notes. And so, I generally I think when people have major disagreements, rather than repeating, the fifth back and forth, which sometimes gets rather tedious, it's more productive to just have a live conversation. So I thought, yeah, we were having a live conversation. So yeah, nice to meet you. Um, uh,
Good to meet you too.
so yeah, I mean, so I have a lot of points I'd like to discuss, but if there are any in particular that you would, then like if there are any like particular points you have in mind, that would be
Um, well, yeah, I did want to address a few specific points of yours. I mean, that's how our conversation started, was me responding to your points. But
yeah,
so in either order, I just wanted to clarify some of the areas where it seems like we're having disagreement, and I don't know really what the nature of the disagreement is necessarily. I think some of it might just be linguistic issues, but um, you came back and you said that I misunderstood something. So you can go first if you like, and
sure.
maybe that will help answer some of my questions.
So okay, so one of the thing, yeah, so I think what the thing that where I think you're in biggest error is there seem to be various points at which you seem to think I was admitting that trans women are not real women in some sense, but that they should sort of be grafted into the concept for purely pragmatic reason, right? So for instance, you say, but far more importantly, the sum of all your assertions is that you clearly acknowledge trans women are not literally women, but say that we should call them women anyways because they seem like women and therefore it feels like the right thing to do. This is plainly not my view. My claim is not that they are not real women. I would grant, of course, that they are not biological females, but my claim is that the word woman does not refer univocally to the word biological female, to biological females. And I don't think you've given any persuasive reason to think that it does. I've given reasons to think it doesn't, which of course we can get into. Um, but I felt like a lot of your reply was just begging the question, was just treating it as obvious that the term woman refers univocally to biological females, and then assuming that any definition that doesn't grant that must thereby be absurd.
You want me to respond?
Yeah,
No, I never said that any other definition, well, absurd. I don't, that it doesn't exist. There are two definitions going on here. And one of these definitions can be exclusionary of the other, but you could still have the second definition, obviously, and we do. They simply just do both exist. I don't think that I'm begging the question when if I were to say that a woman is defined as an adult human female. What but I do think that there is a lot of, I think we we both hear question begging in each other's arguments. But you see, when I say a trans woman is not really a woman, I think you know what I mean when I say that, but in case you don't, I could explain it. But you do, right? I mean, you know what my position is, so you know what I mean when I say
but
that.
I
And so
know,
then you're
but I
taking
know,
that, and then you're saying no, but I do think that they're really a women. Like when you say that, you're saying that obviously in another sense. So we're kind of talking past each other with the same phrasing. When I
sure,
say a woman is not really a woman, I mean a woman is not a trans woman is not an adult human female. To which I think, and when I say you would agree with that, I think I'm right. You just don't like the words that I'm using. You don't like the fact that I say really a woman. You're like, well, yeah, okay, it is an adult human female, so you're right. It's not really a woman, but I don't want to say really a woman because for me, woman can include, and then that's where we get into the reasoning of like whether it's social or a matter of etiquette or a matter of normative usage and all of that. I think happens to be what your reasons are for that being the case, and yet at the same time you you argue, you said, what is it that I'm not, what was it you said, a nutty postmodernist? But if all of
I am
your
not a nutty postmodernist,
yeah,
to be
but
clear.
if all
I
of
don't
your
think you are either.
reasoning,
But
sorry,
I don't think you are either. But I was just clarifying.
you're not right. No, neither one of us. Okay, good. But if all of your reasoning for how we define this comes down to the idea that like, well, words are just entirely social constructs that don't refer, they're not tethered to reality in any sense. That feels pretty postmodernist to me. So there
Okay,
is, it has to
let's
be grounded in something, right? And so I would ask you, what is it grounded in? Because you know where I stand on that.
yeah. So I mean, I think So my view is not that words like don't have any meaning. I think words do have meaning. What I think determines the meaning of words is how people use the words. Like, what makes it so that the word chair refers to, well, it's actually hard to give a precise definition of chair, but refers to what the word chair actually refers to. Well, the answer is, that's how the term chair is used. And so
But
if you want to figure out what a term means, then I think you should look at the way that it's used and look at what most closely corresponds with people's linguistic intuitions. Now, you seem to
that
treat correspondence with linguistic intuitions as in some way procedurally illegitimate. Now, regarding the dispute about calling them real women, so I think it's clear that that is not helpful because, well, or that describing my position as acknowledging that trans women are not literally women or real women or something is not helpful for resolving the dispute because, of course, like we're having a linguistic dispute about what words mean. And so if we're having a linguistic dispute about whether a word has definition A or definition B, and you say, well, this person acknowledges that the word doesn't really have the meaning that I say it does. When you just use that to mean that, sorry, if like suppose we're arguing about the definition of knowledge or something, and you say, well, he acknowledges that his definition is not that the things corresponding to this definition aren't real knowledge. Well, that wouldn't be helpful because, of course, the entire dispute is about what real knowledge is. I would not acknowledge any such thing because I think my definition is correct and you think your definition is correct. So I think it's just mistaken to say I acknowledge that
no, no, it's
real
a,
women.
okay. The point that I'm trying to make, and I think it's a very important point, is that in my view, that's the whole ball game right there. Is if you say, look, okay, I agree that trans women are not biological women, but that's not what I'm talking about here. Okay, that's fine. And I want to get to what you're talking about then. But before we do, if we're already on the same page with the first part of that, then for me, that's the whole ball game because the statement trans women are women means something. And it doesn't mean like you're making your whole argument, and this is the part that I'm going to get to with the whole definitional part. That's where you want to take this. And before we get there, I just want to be like, all right, fine. So we're on the same page. They're not biological women. Okay, good. So
Yeah,
now you want now so this is just a definitional discussion about what does the word woman refer to and can it refer to people who are not biological women but trans women can it include both of them and you would say yes. Okay.
right.
The
Well,
the
so
issue that sorry.
sorry, sorry to cut you off. I do think like both you and I have been making slightly long speeches, and I tend to think back and forths are a bit more productive if we try to go like
Sure.
point by point.
Sure.
But so right, so I think I agree. Yeah, I agree that that trans women are biologically male rather than biologically female. But I dispute that that's like there might be a small number of nutty trans activists who think that trans women are just like
Mhm.
biologically female. Okay, but that's not the claim that most of them would make. The claim that most of them make, and the claim that's more plausible, and the claim that's meant by the literal utterance trans women are women, is that they're included in the category of women. And so to think that that means that I think they are included in the category of biological females is just to assert that your definition is right. You would need to give reasons to think your definition is right. It can't merely be asserted without giving reason.
Yes, that I'm glad you said that. This is one of the things I wanted to get to. We'll get to this in a second. Like we have to give reasons for the things that we're asserting. um but I think that a lot of your definitional arguments rest on this idea that we have to turn to normative usage when we think about how we define words. Words are defined, you said it just a few seconds ago, words are defined by how people use them. Well, that's true of when you put words together into phrases also. And so trans women or women is not just, I mean, what does that mean? That means something based on how people use it. It doesn't simply mean what I think you are using it to mean. You say that trans women, well, I don't know. You said trans women use that phrase. They wouldn't argue that they're biologically women, or at least not many of them would. Um,
Biologically female.
biologically, yeah. The the phrase is a political statement, and the statement is not that trans women that let me put it this way, trans women do not identify as men who identify as women.
But I
Trans
yes,
women
and
identify as
I
actual women, and the thing that they're identifying as is biological females. That's the
no, they're not.
category that, well,
They're
hold
not
on.
identifying. Sorry,
hold
go
on.
ahead.
I don't mean that they would say to you, although there are some radicals who would say, I am literally a woman. And this is actually, I've seen this on like talk shows, and the hosts are like, yes, okay, interesting. This happened on the Daily Show with Trevor Noah. Uh, so there is that, and it is mainstreamed. This is not like some fringe, on these are the people that are getting a lot of media attention. But putting that aside, my point is when you have people say trans women are women, when trans women say trans women are women, they're not saying I'm a man who identifies as a woman, because they don't identify as men. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
They identify
I'm
as a category, and that category is defined by females, biological
so
females. And they might not say I'm a biological female, but they're identifying with the category of females. And so by sharing traits of people who are female, they then also identify with that group. They're
right.
not
So
identifying as biological males, right?
right. So I once again I think you're just conflating the terms male. You're just assuming that the terms male and man and female and woman mean the same thing. So what trans women would say, at least of the ones who have, in my view, the correct view, is that though they are women, they are not biologically female. And the point is that the term woman does not uniquely pick out a biological category. And so I agree that they wouldn't say that they're men who think they're women or men who identify as women. They think that they are biological males who identify as women, and who I think are women, at least in some cases. Um, and so that the entire dispute is about what
But that
whether or
doesn't
not
really
the
solve the
term woman.
problem. That doesn't really solve the problem. I'm using, yes, you're correct. I'm using man as male because that is, of course, one of its definitions. Its first and original definition, and the second one being the one that we're discussing. But the first one is adult human male. That's what man means. I'm not saying that it can't mean other things, and some of those other things could even be in conflict with the first definition. That's how definitions work. But the first definition and the traditional one, which you dispute or you want to expand, that's fine. But that is one of the definitions. So I'm not incorrect in saying that, in referring to males as men. Adult males are men, subadult
Okay, but
males are boys.
so
Men and
but if
boys
you're
is a that is a perfectly fine usage.
okay, but if you are describing what trans activists say of themselves,
Hmm.
then it matters not how you use the words, but how they use the words. And
They
so
don't use
what
it right, and
and
my
so
point doesn't
and so
change.
and so they would not say of themselves, I'm a I'm a man who thinks that they're a woman. They would say, I'm a woman who thinks I'm a woman, but I'm biologically male and think I'm a woman. Okay. And so
Right.
that's
That's
the
what I.
claim that they make. And
Well,
the
hold on.
question is just whether that
That's what I
would
just said,
precede the
though.
term
That's what I'm
woman or
saying.
not.
When I use man, I'll use male from here. But when I use man, I mean adult male. And so when I say they don't identify as men, substituting in that for what I mean and what I'm telling you I mean doesn't change anything, because that's what I'm telling you I meant. They don't
Okay,
identify as
but
adult males who identify as women. They identify as women. And so
no,
and
but they
again,
do identify
this is
as
a little bit
males. No, they
this
do
is a little
identify
bit
as males who identify as
okay. Well, this now we're both speaking for this group, and we would probably want to pull up survey data to look at like the degree of that. But let's just say there's a spectrum. Okay, so there are individuals who would say, "Yeah, I'm a guy who identifies as a woman." Okay, fine. And then there are trans people who say, "No," and would be offended if you would refer to them as male, even though according to you they identify as male who identify as women. So then it wouldn't be offensive to say, "Oh, well, this is a male." But indeed, that is
well.
by many, I'll just say
So
many, considered offensive, and that you should not reference their maleness. You should reference them as women. And if you reference their maleness, that is kind of a snub. But according to you, that wouldn't be a snub at all, because that's a
well,
part of their
well, no.
identity. They identify as
I'm sorry.
males.
So some statement can be true, but can also be a snub.
No, no, no,
Like,
wait. I'm not saying true. I'm saying it's not whether it's true. You and I both agree that it's true.
wait,
But
sorry,
you're
can I?
saying not only is
Sorry,
it
can I?
true, it's also a part of their identity. They identify, so then it wouldn't be a snub if
Right.
it's
So
if they
so I
identify
think
as.
okay. So I think there are going to be different trans people who have different beliefs about it. Some I think are going to have nutty beliefs that don't make any sense. So there are going to be some trans
Yeah.
people who think that they're bi who and I think a fairly small number, but some trans women would say that they're biologically female, and that I would say is a clear mistake. But you said, oh, if they would grant that they're males, then why would it be considered a snub to refer to them as males? Well, some term can be accurate in describing a person and yet can be a snub. So, for example, suppose that you were talking to a step parent and you routinely refer to the step parent as, a biological non-parent, even though what you were
That
saying
doesn't
may be
work.
accurate in
That
that.
analogy
Can I,
doesn't work.
sorry, can I? Sorry, let me
All right.
finish the
Yeah,
sentence.
go ahead.
Even though what you would be saying would be true, namely that they are
Hmm.
biologically not they're not a parent in a purely biological sense. Nonetheless, it would be a snub because even though, and if you asked a step parent whether they're a biological parent, I think most of them would say no, and the ones who would say yes would be confused. But nonetheless, uh, uh, you know, I think they would say, "Well, I'm still a real parent." They think that they're a parent in the sense that matters. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
The analogy doesn't hold up because they don't identify as such. And we're discussing the category, we're discussing whether or not they identify as such. So if the parent was to say, yeah, I identify as a non-parent, and then you say, oh, you're a non-parent, they'd be like, yeah, I just told you, like, that's how I identify.
Wait,
But
sorry.
if they don't identify that way, if they identify as a parent and they consider it insulting or somehow demeaning or condescending to refer to them as a non-parent, which I've never known a step parent to be like, oh yeah, I'm a non-parent. I've never heard any step parent
Right.
openly
So
identify as
I
a
think
non-parent. That's
no,
just not a
I think
thing.
yeah, I think you should. So let's get clear on what things are being claimed to be analogous. The term woman is being claimed to be analogous to the term parent, and the term biological woman or biological male is claimed to be identical. Is claimed to be analogous to the term step parent. Um, or sorry, to the term biological parent. And
Mm-hmm.
so if you ask, so what a step parent primarily identifies as, like if you ask them, um, like the thing that they think of as a major part of their identity would presumably be a parent. Just like I think what a trans woman would think is that what they primarily identify as is being a woman. That's a thing that's part of their identity. Now, if you ask them, okay, but are you a biological male? Or sorry, are you a biological woman or something, or a biological female? I think if they're being accurate, they would say no. Now, if you even though they're not a biological, even though they're not biologically female, if you routinely referred to them as a biological non-female, they would take that to be a snub because the thing that you're pointing out about their identity, while accurate, is not the thing that's more important about their identity. Just as in the case of a biological non-parent, it's true that a step parent is not a biological parent. But if you routinely refer to a step parent as, you know, Joe and his biological non-parent, they would find that a little bit outrageous because even though it's technically accurate, the idea is that it's not focusing on the more important uh, fact about their identity, and in fact, the more important fact about their identity is that they're a parent.
Yeah, I think the discussion we're having right now is the difference in our positions is you're saying that to identify a trans woman as a biological male is to state a fact about them that may not be the most important part of their identity. And what I'm saying is that that may not be how they identify at all.
Yeah,
At
I agree,
all.
and
And that's why it's
maybe some of them
insulting.
were,
It's
and
it's
then
not
maybe
no, there's a
were.
spectrum. We both acknowledge that there's a spectrum and that there's different people who have different beliefs along the spectrum. So there are people who are going to be over here and they're going to be like, I am literally biologically a female, just like any other female. And that exists. And then you have people over here who are going to be like, they have no compunction whatsoever about saying like, yeah, I'm a guy, I'm a guy or a man or or a male, whatever, who identifies as a woman, and I would like you to respect my identity as such, and don't go out of your way to snub me and these like misgender me or anything of that nature. But if you ask me straight up, am I a man or am I a male? Yeah, sure, yes. And that's not really a part of their identity, but they're not offended by it. What I'm saying, however, is that the statement a trans woman is a woman is a political statement in which being biologically male is not a part of the identity. And that's how the political statement is used. And that's why it is, I suppose you could say, a stepping stone to the argument that trans women are women in every way. And lo and behold, that is exactly what has
Wait,
happened. Like the argument that trans women are biologically female is first wave trans movement began as what you're describing is very reasonable. Look, I realize I'm male, but I identify as such. I have preferred pronouns, preferred being the operative word back when they were preferred. and such things. It was a matter of respect, etiquette, normative behavior. Like that's largely where I think your argument is, if I have you correctly. But the second wave, third wave, fourth wave trans movements have reached a point where now it is, I am literally a biological woman. This is like the position of what's her name, Veronica Ivy, who went on the Trevor Noah show and said that, and said, I am a biological female. And the stepping stone for that to get to that position is trans women are women. Trans women are women.
But I don't think it's productive to discuss whether our positions are a stepping stone to other views that we both reject. Rather, it's we should discuss which of our views is in fact correct.
But your entire position is based on normative usage, and that is the normative usage of the phrase trans women are women. And so I
Wait,
don't
what?
see how
Sorry,
you can say,
can you explain what you mean by the phrase normative usage?
how about typical usage? Not normative as in terms of like having a moral valence, but normal,
Okay,
typical. How's
right.
that?
So I
Not
think part of
descriptive, not as
yeah,
opposed
sure.
to descriptive.
I think part of the considerations that are relevant is how people in fact use the term. I think this is true of all words, how words work. I also think there are going to be some normative used to mean moral considerations that are going to be relevant.
Mhm.
But right, so I think that my definition better captures common usage, and I think that it, given the definition,
Okay.
if you ask most people the definition of biological female, they'll be clear that, a biological female is, I mean, I think most of them would have a precise definition, but, someone
Yeah.
with XY chromosomes,
Yeah.
roughly. I don't think that's the right definition quite,
Yeah.
but
That's
it's pretty close. Um, uh, but and so then if people are, have or sorry, XX chromosomes, I mean, and so then if a person has XY chromosomes, but they say that they're a woman, then they would just be mistaken. So I think, common usage regulates what the terms mean, and
But do
then
you think that common
and then
usage is the
uh,
determining factor, the only factor?
um, I don't think I don't think it's the it's a little complicated to answer whether it's the only factor, but it's the most important factor. I'd be curious to know, how do you think we decide on what terms mean, if not using common use, if not relying on common usage?
Sorry, trying to adjust this better.
No worries.
Um, well, I think that it's a combination of things, and it depends on the nature of the term. So, if we're dealing with, let's say, terms that are in any way tethered to science, then there are other considerations than it just being a popularity contest. Because, for instance, you could go around and ask people, "What is an electron?" And if that was your way of defining the term, you would end up with a horrible definition of the term because most people don't know what an electron is. They'd give you a bad definition. So we shouldn't just base this on the most common usage of the term. And
Right.
woman
So
happens to have a tether to a biological definition. Now you might argue, well, it's not a one for one. It's not a perfect relationship, but it's tethered. It's tethered to female.
so
And we can get into that part of
so
it. In
so
fact,
so like
yeah.
right. So the electron case is a slightly tricky case where there what I would say is that what matters is not just like how most people use the word, but how people who have the relevant kinds of knowledge about the thing. So like
Yeah,
how they use the word, right? So
I
like,
agree.
most people use the term electron to refer to like, the little components of, of the world, but they don't know much about it, and so when greater scientific discovery illuminates more about what the terms
How
mean.
is
I
woman
think
different from electron?
so. Well, I don't think that there are some people who have well, there are scientists who know more about um, about uh, what electrons are than um, than uh, than other people. It's not like there are some people who know way more about the definitions of the word man and woman than other people. And if there
Yes, there
are
are.
people, if
Yes, there are.
okay,
What do you mean?
so who are the people who use
See,
them
you're
are
question
uniquely?
begging because you're assuming before you get there that woman is already this broader definition of woman. And so, in that sense, I guess there,
I haven't assumed anything. What I've said is that there
okay,
are. I
gynecologists,
don't.
right? Like biologists would
Okay.
know more about the definition of a woman. Like, but I think that you're in your
Well,
mind, correct me if
I.
I'm wrong, but you're saying,
I
well,
mean,
wait a minute. I don't mean that restricted definition of woman. I mean the more social definition of woman. Like, who's an expert in defining that? We
no,
all
no.
just kind of know what that means. correct?
So like no, when it comes to electrons, the reason why most people can't give a precise definition of electrons is that well they know that there are these sort of like little little small components that populate the world. They don't know very much about them, and so what matters is the intuitions. So like what philosophers look for in a definition is a set of necessary and sufficient conditions for something being the thing. So
Hmm.
take knowledge for instance. Knowledge. For, for a while, philosophers thought knowledge was justified true belief. And the reason they thought that was that if you think intuitively about lots of paradigm cases of knowledge, they seem to be cases of justified true belief. And if you think about cases that are not knowledge, then they seem to not be cases of justified true belief. So, for instance, if I have, I know that Paris is the capital of France because my belief is true and my belief is justified. Um, Now, it turns out there are some obscure examples to that definition, but putting that aside, so what you look for is something that seems to most fit what uh, what people's judgments are across the specific cases. Now, when
Hmm.
it comes to an electron, most people don't know highly specific facts about electrons, um, and so
Right.
when looking for the definition of electron, what you have to look for is uh, what things, given the surprising facts about the actual world are as they are, what things seem to match people's definitions. Right? So given a fully filled in description of what an electron is, what things match people's definitions of them.
Yes, but
Yeah,
we
if you
can
want
do
to do
the
that, if you want to do that, you'll have to look at what people who know what electrons are actually think about the subject.
we can do the
Now,
exact same
in
thing with
contrast,
woman. We can do the
well,
exact same thing with woman. This isn't, I don't feel like this is helping. We can play the same game with woman, and we can say that, well, a woman is an adult human female, and there are going to be scientists who are going to know about. And indeed, if you ask people on the street, how do you define female, most of them will get that wrong because they'll say, well, it's genitalia, or they'll say that it's like chromosomes, or they'll say, and if you get no specifically what is it, actually, uh, you don't always get an accurate answer. Now you're going to say, well, wait a minute, we're not talking about females, we're talking about woman. Right. The social definition. That's what I
no,
meant by question
no,
begging earlier. So let me
no,
let me just
I
I think
no, you're
I think the whole electron thing got us off. Maybe it was a distracting example. The point that I was trying to make with that is simply this. If you make definitions of popular, just simply taking a survey of what everybody thinks the word means or how people generally tend to use it,
okay, but
then
that's
okay,
not
then
my position.
okay,
My
what is your
position is
position?
not that you determine. So my position is not that you determine what words mean just by doing a survey and asking a bunch of people what they mean. Just like with the term knowledge, if you do a survey, you know, you will probably not get very informative definitions. What you look
Mhm.
for is you look at what people, rather than looking at what people's intuitions are directly about the word, what you look for is what people's intuitions are about the things that the word applies to. So if people have the intuition that say, like if you figure out, so you start by looking at what things do people intuitively think of as chairs. Um, and then you look at what are the shared criteria among the things that people think of as chairs. Now, it should be that, it should be that rather than just about what people think about as chairs before they know anything,
Mhm.
uh, it should be about what they think of uh, if knowing the relevant facts, right? So you might think something's a chair when really it's, I don't know, a fish viewed from very far away. Um, but yeah, so the way you
Isn't
rely on intuition,
isn't this the isn't this the argument that you sort of laid out in the introduction of your original essay, where you talked about there's a series of traits that are typically possessed by and with biological females, such as, and you listed several of them. Isn't that kind of the point that you're making now?
no, it's a bit different. Um, there, I was giving a definition. Here, I'm just describing the epistemology of how words work. So the way you figure out what words mean is you look at people's intuitions about the things that the word applies to, and then you try to find out a unique set of necessary and sufficient conditions that include
So
all
where
and
does
only
it?
the things that people think they
What would
apply
be
to
an
in a
example? Like,
question.
let's take Apple. What would be? How does that work?
So you look at the things that people refer to as apples, um, and
Hmm.
so then you notice that they have certain criteria in common.
Such
Um,
as,
well, I don't actually know the definition of an apple, but I could give an approximate definition. Right? So
well, but like
they
roundness,
tend to have a
redness,
core.
something
They
like
have to
that.
they tend to have seeds. I mean, I think there are lots of things that are round and red, but so I think we'll need a more precise definition. So I mean, like really, the right answer will be like fruit of the whatever kinds of plants or trees
Mhm.
grow apples, and that'll probably be given a precise scientific definition.
This
That's what
is
really
the I,
the
I
trick
I
is.
still am not seeing how this is distinguished from what I just said, your introductory discussion, where you were talking about the traits of things associated, like basically talking about people's intuitions of an object. And in that
So
case,
there
the
I was
object
giving
was
so there I was giving a definition of what I thought the term women meant. Here I'm explaining how it is that we go about figuring out what words in general mean.
okay. But as it applies to woman, it's the same process that we're discussing right now with Apple.
Yeah, I think that I
Okay.
think that the way to
Okay.
figure out what words in general means will also tell us how to figure out what the word woman means.
Right. I don't think that looking at how at the traits that people commonly associate with Apple would be a good way of going about figuring out what an apple is or defining it. Or to be more specific, to go to that passage actually. Um, and it seems like we have people in the room. So for anyone who isn't caught up on this, do you mind if I just read this passage? Because you and I both know the context, but maybe not everyone does.
Yeah,
This is
I don't know exactly what passage you refer to, but yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so it's the introduction. I'm just calling it the introduction section. You didn't title it as such. Let me first tell you what I think the terms man and woman refer to. There are a series of traits typically possessed by and associated with biological females. And then you list some of them. You list having long hair, being nurturing, painting your nails. You also list being born female. Um, and so on. In short, these feminine traits are what determine whether, when you interact with someone, you think of them as a woman. Intuitively, it's easy to think of, say, Blair White as a woman, even though she has small gametes. This is because she has a significant number of feminine traits. The same point applies to man. It refers to people with a significant number of masculine traits. Okay, so the definition of man in this passage is a person with a significant number of masculine traits, or a woman is someone with a significant number of feminine traits, such as things like having long hair, having painted nails, having a high pitched voice, being nurturing. These are the things that would determine whether or
So
not you're a
right,
woman.
so
Right.
so I think yeah, a man is someone with a significant number of masculine traits. A woman is someone with a significant number of feminine traits.
One problem that springs to mind, and this is not my main issue with this argument, but one thing that springs to mind is that you didn't say anything in there about identity. So what if you have like a really effeminate gay man and he has a preponderance of feminine traits? Is he a woman even though he doesn't even identify as a woman?
So I so I don't think that identity is the only thing that matters, but I think even a very effeminate gay man would have enough male making traits that
Well, you
would
assume that, but let's say he
biologically.
doesn't. Let's say he doesn't have enough. Let's say that it's
No, well,
clearly
but so if you think some of the important traits are what secondary sex characteristics the person has, and what and how the person refers to themselves. Potentially these alone are enough to make a person
okay. So
biologically.
identity is one of the main ones, and that needs to be in there too, right?
Yeah, I think I did list that as one of them. But yeah.
Okay.
But
So
sorry, so I do have a question. But sorry, if you have more stuff to say about this,
just
I can.
one, yeah, yeah. The main thing here for me is that the only reason that, well, there's two things going on in that list, and one is that you have the category by my definition, right, female, and then you have the traits of that category. That to me looks like a category error. But putting that aside, you
No,
look at these
no.
traits.
Sorry, it's not a category error because I'm not saying like a female is one with female traits. That would clearly be circular. I'm saying a
You
woman is a
said being
person.
born female.
I'm
All these other
I'm saying
things are only associated with femininity because they are
so
associated with
I'm
people
giving
who are born female.
I'm giving a definition. So a female uh, is just a I'm using the term female the way, just to refer to people who are biologically female. I mean, to give you an example, like I think it's probably going to be something like those who are oriented towards producing large gametes or something. It's a little bit difficult to do a precise definition of the terms male and female, but
Okay,
fine, we can have a decently operative definition even if it's
what
not very
makes these
precise.
traits
But
feminine? Would be my question. What makes them feminine? What makes
then
long hair feminine?
they're associated with females,
What's
which
a
I think
female?
means purport.
So wait,
I was
wait,
just
wait.
I
They're
was just
associated
explaining
with
that.
they're associated with being female. So how
Yes.
does okay, okay, so here's my question. So Your definition of woman is having traits that's associated with being female.
Uh,
Having enough traits, having a significant number of traits that are
yeah,
associated with females.
yeah, that's right.
Okay. Okay. What was the point
Um,
that you wanted to make?
okay, well, so one question is like, your essay, and it's rather, you make many points in it, but at no point do you really give anything that to me it strikes me as a reason to think that that the right definition of the term woman is adult human female. Like, why think that's the right definition?
What do you mean?
Why? So you think that a woman is an adult human
Mhm.
female?
It's a
And my question is,
descriptive definition. It's
and
not a normative
my question is, why do you think that's the right definition? Because you seem to think I was in error for thinking the definition was something different. So the question is just like, why think that definition is correct?
I'm not as no, it's not that I'm assuming that you're in error simply because it's that I feel as well, I think that all of the reasons that you give that it shouldn't be are begging the question. And so
Okay,
I one by
okay,
one,
I
yeah,
obviously disagree with that. And
yeah,
we can talk about the reasons later. But I mean, if you think that that the definition, you think a woman is an adult human female, correct?
yeah.
Okay, and so why do you think that?
That just happens to be the word that we've used for that. The problem is if we were to use another word, right? There is subadult and adult status in every animal. And we have terms for these different things, right? Like a coal and a stallion and a filly and a mare in horses, a girl and a woman and a boy and a man in humans. We do this with a lot of animals. We have a term for the subadult, the juvenile version male, and the
I
adult version
agree.
male. So
I
we have
agree that
those. Yeah,
yeah,
go ahead.
I agree that historically that's how the term has traditionally been used. But the definitions of words have changed, and it seems like
No,
lots of
wait,
people.
it's not a historical thing. It's a scientific thing. There's a classification for, unless you're arguing that like being an adult is like a fiction. Like
No,
being an
no.
adult is a category,
What
and we have a term for that.
what I
That's
was
all it
saying
is.
what I was saying was a historical feature is that what has held historically is that typically the word woman has referred to adult human females. Like for most of history,
Yes.
I would grant that. Okay, but words can change, and it seems like certainly how many people use the word has changed. And so if very large numbers of people begin using the word differently, like why think the definition hasn't changed?
Okay. But you do concede that there are and there should be terms for juvenile and adult forms of animals. Yes. In
Uh,
science, we have terms for these things.
I mean, we have them for some animals. I don't think we have them for all animals. I think it's often useful to have those. So I don't, I like, it seems fine that like, we have a term for an adult, I don't know,
I
dog
mean, is
or,
there a problem with having the term boy and having that refer to a juvenile male?
I mean, I think I would dispute that the term boy refers to a juvenile male. I would give a similar analysis of the term boy that I give of the term man. I think it would refer to a juvenile person with a sufficient number of masculine traits. But I mean that's sort of a separate topic. But um,
Well, you asked me why I think woman refers to adult female, and I'm saying, well, it's simply a convention in science that we have terms for juveniles and adults of the male and the female of a
we
species.
yeah
But it
we
doesn't have to be woman. If woman becomes
so we
socially
yeah,
co-opted,
it's true we often have members have one term for members of of adult members of various species. But here my claim is that we had a term that originally referred to adult members of the human
hmm
species. And then over time, the meaning changed so that rather than referring to adult members of the human species, now it refers to now it refers to people with a significant number of
sure,
traits
sure,
of either man refers to people with a sufficient number of masculine traits.
sure. But as I
And
said,
so
oh, go ahead, go ahead.
it's not like that makes it impossible to speak. If you want to refer to adult male, you can simply use the phrase adult male. Um, and so I don't see what reason you've given to think that linguistic shift has not. Um, like you seem really confident that your definition is right, even in the face of rapidly shifting common usage. You seem to think that people who disagree with you about this are like some kind of insane postmodernist. And yet, it, as far as I can tell, you've offered basically no reason to think your definition is correct.
Okay, all right, hold on. Yeah, my definition is right, and you just acknowledged that it's right. Like we both agree that
Wait,
one definition.
I acknowledge nothing of the sort.
You want to let me go here?
Yeah, sorry, go, yeah,
You
go ahead.
did acknowledge that one definition of woman historically is adult human female. You are aware of this fact, right? This is a fact that historically, now you may say that this has since evolved. That's fine. But one of the definitions of woman has been and is adult human female. Another definition is the social one that we're discussing that can include a larger number of people of different backgrounds, including trans women, right? And you're saying, well, now that we have the second definition, okay, fine. But you're not denying that the first definition exists, are you?
So I
No,
agree that
right?
I agree this is historically what people have tended to mean by the term. I think in modern
Hmm.
day this is not what most people mean by the term, and I think that this
Most
doesn't
people?
and I think this doesn't fit our linguistic intuitions about the term as
What do you
well
mean
as
most
other
people?
definitions.
What do you mean most
So
people?
wait, sorry, let me finish the point briefly. So as an analogy, like historically, people have thought the term knowledge meant justified true belief. But over time, philosophers, they discovered counterexamples to that. They discovered cases where something seems to be a case of justified true belief, but doesn't seem to be knowledge. And so I think similarly with the term woman, we've discovered cases where people they seem like women, seems them being women fits our linguistic intuitions better, but uh, they are not they're not biologically female, and so we've come to see that the definition was incorrect.
Most people do not agree with your definition. There's been a lot of survey data on this. Most Americans do not think that trans women are women. It's a minority of Americans. I don't, now listen, I don't, as I said earlier, I don't think that definition should be a matter of just asking the public, what do you all think? And then just going with whatever the majority says.
Yeah,
But that seems to be your position. And so your
well,
position gets defeated by the fact that it's not actually the case that that's the common usage.
that's not my position, and I think I've explained several times
You
both
just
why
said
and
you
both what
literally just said
both
most people.
sorry, let me finish the sentence. Both why and that it's not my position. What I claim is that what determines the right definition is what corresponds with how most people use the word, not what most people think the definition is. There's a difference between how most people use a word, what things they use it to
Mhm.
apply to, and what most people think the definition is. So, for example, in the knowledge case, whatever the right definition of knowledge is, if there's one, it'll have like several dangling. Like the right definition will be something very complicated, and certainly it won't be what you get if you just ask most people what knowledge is. But
Mhm.
nonetheless, it's the right definition because it better meets the things that people intuitively think of as being knowledge.
How do you determine what most people use it as, or how most people think of the word in the sense that
Well,
you're describing? If
I
it's
think
not
that
asking them what does this word mean, then how do you determine this?
you rather than asking them what the word means, you ask them about specific instances of the word and see if they think that the word applies there. So in the knowledge case, so and sorry, I know giving the knowledge example a decent amount. So lots of people find the definition of knowledge being justified true belief to be pretty intuitive. Okay, but if suppose you ask people about a case like the following, so you think you're going to be hired for a job, and you have two coins in your pocket, and so you form the following belief: the person who will be hired for this job has two coins in their pocket, and purely by coincidence, you're not going to be hired. So assume your belief is justified. Purely by coincidence, however, you're not going to be hired, but the person who will be hired has two coins in their pocket. In case like that, it doesn't seem like you have knowledge, and I think most people would have the intuition that you don't have knowledge, which is why philosophers have treated that to um, to be a decisive counterexample
But
to knowledge as justified true belief. So what you look at is rather than what people directly have intuitions about regarding the definition, you look at what people have intuitions about regarding the specific instances of the definition, whether or not it applies to particular cases. But I would be curious. So suppose a person says like suppose a person uses the term woman the way I do. Do you think they're making like a linguistic error?
a linguistic error?
Like are they saying any if are they saying anything false?
Well, that's a bit tricky. I guess it depends on what, in the sense that if they're saying anything false.
Like if someone
Uh,
if I say Blair White is a woman, am I saying something false?
well, Blair White is not a female.
Okay, but I don't think the word woman Like,
Right.
do you grant that the
Exactly. That's my
term
point.
do you
That's my point. The only way in which trans women are women, and that's the basis of this entire thing, is if we get into word games, right? So we
but
both, that's why I said at the beginning of this whole thing that if we can both agree that trans women are not literally women, and we both know what
no
the
no
phrase, hold on, let me finish. We both know what the phrase literally woman means when I say it. You're asking me a question right now that is predicated on the idea that when a person speaks, you have to have some understanding of what they mean when they say that thing. When someone says Blair White is a woman, and I can't really, I'm like, well, what do they mean when they say that? Exactly. So when I say literally woman, you're like, wait a minute, I don't know what that. See, you're that's a contradiction in your argument there. You know what I mean, but just in case you don't, and I've already laid this out in the beginning of the argument, female, right? And when I ask you what those traits that determine who's a woman, where they come from, you said being female. Okay. And when I said that trans women are not identifying as women, they're not identifying as men who identify as women, they're identifying as women, and woman means female. And you're like, no, it doesn't. But when I ask you what is a woman, you're like, well, it's all these traits that are tied to female. So for me, it's like, well, that's the whole
but
ball game, game over.
okay.
Because I mean,
So
the rest of this is just a discussion about whether or not people can use the word woman to refer to other things. Well, yes, of course, that's how language works. The people can use woman to refer to anything they want to, and if enough people start doing it, it will now have that. They can start using woman to refer to apples, and if enough Americans do it, if 50% of Americans are doing that, guess what? That's now a word for apple. That's fine. That's how it
right.
works.
So imagine if okay. So you use the phrase "real woman" when the entire point in dispute is whether the term whether it's one of the permissible meanings of the term "woman." One of the things that's reasonably within usage of the linguistic community is the term as I use it, or whether people who say Blair White is a woman are being mistaken.
What
Now,
do you mean by
it's
permissible? You mean what do you mean
like
permissible?
whether there are cases where words have multiple meanings. So
Yeah.
the term the term toxic can either refer to a chemical property that things have, or it can refer to a sort of like emotional property people have, where you say that person's very toxic. Um,
Right.
so in this case, um, so if the entire dispute is just about how people so do you grant that our dispute is about how people use words? That we're having a semantic dispute.
Yes, exactly.
Right. Okay. So if we're having so we're having a semantic dispute about what the term woman means, then trans women who say, I am a woman, they're just using language differently from how you're using it. And in fact, they're using language differently from how you're using it in a way that's in a way, they're not using it in some obscure way that no one talks. They're using it in a way that's quite common. And so
Yes.
just like it's
Yes.
permissible to say, or just like you're not in error if you say, um, if you say something like, um, uh, let's see, what's
My
an example of that?
narcissistic ex-boyfriend was very toxic.
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
that wouldn't be an error. You're just usly terms differently. And so I think
I agree
similarly,
with you.
if you say Blair
Sorry.
White is a woman, do, do you at least grant that when I say the phrase Blair
Of
White
course
is
I
a
agree with
woman?
that, but my
Okay,
response, oh, sorry, go ahead.
yeah. So sorry. So just to be clear, you grant that if I say Blair White is a woman, I'm not saying anything false.
I think you're not necessarily contradicting your own belief system, and so in that sense, it's
But am
not
I saying
false.
something false? But am I saying something false? Because
Well,
things can be false even if they don't.
that's what the whole debate is about, isn't it? Like whether or not a trans woman is a woman. And
But
then that
things
immediately becomes, well, in what sense are we talking? And so if it's in the sense that you mean it, well, of course that's not false. But that's in that sense. The whole thing is
right.
based on
So
how you're
so
using the word and what you're taking it to mean. So if we
I
take, it's sort of like saying, "Hey, David, look, if I define woman as just anyone who identifies as a woman, and then I say Blair White is a woman, am I lying? No. I mean, yeah, that's perfectly logically coherent. There's nothing wrong with that. But should we
right.
define it that way is the whole question. That's
Okay.
so
So
it's so
suppose you say Blair White is an apple, and then when the person's like, "What? No, 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 she's not." They say, "Well, I use the term apple uh, to mean, uh, you know, I don't know,
yeah,
to mean a human."
right.
That person, what they're saying is true according to their definition. but it's not
Right.
true because they're using words incorrectly. There are correct meanings of words that correspond with how words are commonly used, and so that
Right.
person is not they're not using word apple correctly. And so the
Right. But
question is,
according to your
and so
argument,
and so
if
and so
enough
and so
people, according to your argument, if enough people start using Apple that way, then it is correct.
yeah, it
Because
is.
that's what you're
But
doing
I
with
I
woman.
think
You're saying, well,
yeah,
look, a lot of people use it that way, so then it
I
is.
mean, I think that like that's just a like obvious feature of language. Like if tomorrow everyone in the world stopped using the term apple to refer to the fruit and began to use the term apple to refer to something complete to refer to humans, then well then
That would be an
then
apple.
you know
That's how language
yeah
works, right? That's what we
yeah
would call it from then on, right?
yeah and if a person
Right.
10 years after that happened said David is an apple, they'd be saying something true.
Right. Right.
Right.
But in that world, right, in the future, somebody's saying like, yeah, David's an apple, and they'd be like, yeah, he's an apple, and they all know what that means because that's what that word has come to mean, right? But then they could also say, yeah, but he's not really an apple. He's not literally an apple. And that would not be confusing. They'd be like, oh, right. No, he's not. No, but this is how the word is evolved. So this is what we mean by this
Well,
now. Just
I
like if I
think
say, like, oh, David's cool. Oh, yeah. But he's not literally, like, we're not talking temperature here, right? Oh, of course not. Like, we still understand the original meaning and we know that we're not speaking literally when we're not speaking literally. And that's my point. This is a metaphorical usage, which, for reasons that have to do with etiquette or such, we all kind of go along with, but it's not, at least you and I and most people, I would argue, are not under any delusion that a trans woman is really a woman.
so.
But figuratively speaking, sure, if we're going to use woman in this new expanded way where it just means anybody who has traits associated with women, then okay, they're women, but they only are women because they have a bunch of traits that are associated with quote unquote real women, females.
But sorry.
So,
So
and you said so
you and
yourself.
no, I didn't say so myself.
Yes, you
I
said the
said
only
that
reason, I have the quote right here. You
that
said the only
so what I
reason that they are considered women is because they have traits associated with females.
yeah right. But
Right.
so our dispute I think is about you seem to think that the term real women refers to like you know that the definition of women that includes trans women or it has to do with having a significant number of broadly female traits. Um,
Hmm.
but that definition is, in some way illegitimate. That's not the real definition. And my point is, there are different ways that people talk. I don't think either definition is more real than the other. And in fact, I think the definition as I'm using it better corresponds with the linguistic intuitions that most people have.
What do you mean by linguistic intuition? Because, oh, by the way, this is something else you keep bringing up that most people have. Again, most people do not agree with the statement and they do not agree with your position. It's an interesting
But
position.
sorry,
And again,
do you,
I will repeat,
sorry,
hold on, hold on,
wait,
hold on,
David,
hold on, hold on.
but we had this conversation. Do you remember the response I gave to this?
What is that?
Like 5 minutes ago, we went through this. Do you remember what I said in response?
What did you say?
So what I said in response was, I agree that most people, I don't actually know the exact full numbers, but if we grant, but even if it's right, most people don't agree
It's
with
less
my
than,
definition.
yeah, go ahead.
Um, that that most people think that trans women aren't women. That won't settle the question of what the right definition is, because what the right definition is can be determined by more than what most people think it is. What matters is most people's intuitions about particular instances of the definition, rather than about the definition itself.
Right, but those intuitions, I'm asking you,
Just
what
like
are those intuitions based on? And I'm telling you, like, people might have intuitions about the word woman, but those intuitions about the word woman are rooted in how they define the word woman.
sure,
And so it
sure.
comes back to the same thing. And in your
So
own
let me
essay, you write multiple times about common usage of the word and how people commonly use the word. And I'm pushing back on that point, saying, I don't think that's a good way to define this word. But if
right.
you're going to define the word in this way, guess what? Over 80% of people don't define it that way. So the common usage is actually not the case. It doesn't go with your
Right.
position.
Sorry. So do you agree that there can be a difference between what most people think a definition of a word is and what the common usage of the term is?
Maybe. Can you flesh that out?
So for example, I think if you ask most people in 1980, is a woman someone with uh, XX chromosomes? I think most people would have said yes. Now, that actually isn't common usage because there are clear cases, like cases of Swyer syndrome, where people have XX chromosomes, but where just everyone agrees they're not women, right? And so really, if you want to look at what terms, what definition is that gives the right set of necessary and sufficient conditions, which actually picks out what people refer to the term as, well, then it seems like you're going to need to rely on on more than um,
Common usage.
it, sorry, no, it's that you won't just look at what definition people think is right, but you'll have to look at what things people use the term to apply to. Or in the case of knowledge, I don't whatever the right definition of knowledge is, it's very unlikely most people would give it in a survey result.
Okay,
But nonetheless,
okay,
that'll be the right
but
definition so long as it best corresponds with people's intuitions about the range of linguistic factors. Now, I can go through some of the reasons, some of the cases where I think the adult human female definition is really counterintuitive. Um,
okay, but this is where, for me, it starts to get into this post-structuralist soup that you say that you're not swimming in. I'll give you an example. I'll give an example. Actually, I'll give you one of your own examples, where you were talking about the word toxic. It has a definition, a usage in chemistry, but also in psychology with toxic behavior. And they're both, and so the word has two different meanings, but they're both valid. And you tried to use that to make the case that woman can have two different meanings and they can both be valid. My first response is, well, just because it's true of the word toxic doesn't mean that it's going to be true of every other word. You would have to show that it's true, and you just question
right.
beg that one
So
and move on.
so
Well,
well,
hold on. That
sorry.
hold on. That was
If you're
I
going to give
started by
multiple
saying
points,
that's just my first thought. That's not the point that I'm trying to get to.
can
The
we go
point that I
thought
want
by
to get
thought?
to is toxic, right? It does have these two usage, but you will also find that people commonly, the what you're talking about, like sort of the normative, how people normally use it, and we should use that to sort of understand the intuition, what intuition people have about what this word might mean, and that's what we should go with. All right, well, people, if we did that with the word toxic in a psychology setting, it doesn't work. It doesn't actually work because the way that people intuitively use it is wrong. They're wrong. The way that there's most of the behaviors that get called toxic by people are not toxic. Things like somebody putting down healthy boundaries is almost always viewed by the other person as toxic behavior, something like that. Toxic is overwhelmingly abused. People misunderstand what it means. There's a lot of other examples like this. So even though it has a meaning in psychology, the correct usage of that meaning in that context is actually the one that is, if you go out and do the experiment that you're talking about and getting like the intuition of the public, so to speak, that's not going to get you the correct definition. So words can have multiple definitions. You're right. Some of them can be wrong. Some of the usages that people have can
Right.
actually be wrong.
So what you want to look at is not so you okay. Well, actually, let me address the first thing first. So you say what applies to the word toxic wouldn't necessarily apply to all things. I agree. I was just using it as an example to illustrate a broader linguistic point, which is that if there are multiple different ways that people use the word, we wouldn't normally say one of the ways in which people use the word is correct, unless that definition has some obvious defect. So unless there's some clear reason to reject one of the definitions, then um,
You mean
then
only
we
one? You mean we wouldn't normally say only one is correct?
that's right. So I'm
Right.
saying so if you buy this first point, then I think you won't. If you buy this first point, then what you would think is just look, the word woman is pollissence. It can mean adult human female. It can mean a person with sufficient number of feminine traits. Maybe it can even mean other things. There are multiple permissible definitions of the word, multiple ways it can be used. That person speaking incorrectly. None of these definitions are correct. Just like with the term toxic, uh, the word can be used in multiple different ways. And I think in basically in every case where there's a word that has multiple different ways that it's used, unless there's one like major defect with one of the definitions, we say both of the definitions are correct definitions. Okay, fine. So moving on to the second point. So you say that the word toxic is overwhelmingly abused. Right? So what you want to look at is not just so you don't just look at like the account that meets the most instances of the term. What you want to look at is the account that across counterfactual conditions meets people's intuitions about the term. But so in the case of the term toxic, when people think that some behavior is toxic, uh, uh, when it's in fact not toxic, like laying down healthy boundaries or whatever, that's because what they're doing is they're making a mistake about some facts about the world, right? So they're using the word toxic correctly, but they're making a mistake about facts about the world, and so they think falsely that that if you lay down healthy boundaries or something, that this
Hmm.
is emotionally harmful, that it has negative effects on relationships and so on. There are a whole range of things that
But
uh,
all of this applies with women.
I don't think it does apply with women. Um, I don't think that. So I don't think that when the typical person using the term woman who says trans women are women, I don't think that most of the time they're just like unaware that trans women have X have XY chromosomes. Um, I think they're aware of the biological facts, and they just think that the terms don't uniquely pick out biological facts.
But that's not the meaning of the political statement.
I I don't think that's right. Like
Okay.
when people say trans when people say that when a person says the phrase trans women are women, I don't think what I think they're doing is they're saying, look, there's this category of women, and they think that
Mhm.
trans women are included in the category of women. Just like if a person says, I don't know, uh, uh, goose eggs are eggs, they mean there's this broad category of eggs that includes goose eggs.
You're arguing that you basically have woman can apply to females. That's one type. And it can also apply to, this is going back to the list of attributes that people can have, and if they have enough of them, then therefore they are women. So it can apply to females and people who are like females, who have enough of these traits that make them enough like females that we can now call them a term that has historically meant adult females. But now the term will also mean people who are like what that term originally meant. And now they're included in that group because they're like that group. So to me, I'm
Just
immediately thinking it's like, okay, well, yeah, but just because you're similar to a thing, even very similar to a thing, that in itself, plus people just popularly having an intuition that, oh, well, maybe that's what that means now, doesn't mean that that's what that is. So
Okay,
this
but
all
if you
just
don't
comes
if you
back to the
don't know
same.
if you don't rely on linguistic intuitions about what terms mean, then I don't know how you figure out what any term means. Regarding the first point about
Well,
how
reality. I mean,
um
these unless you're
well
again, unless you're
wait,
swimming in the
sorry
postmodern
sorry sorry
soup.
sorry sorry let me finish addressing. So regarding um the earlier point, I was not saying that having traits that are like X, that having traits of X makes you X.
Oh,
What I'm
okay.
saying and I don't think that. So I think that trans women have many traits like biological females, but I don't think they're biological females. But what I think is that there was this natural. So I was just explaining what the definition was. I wasn't giving a justification for the definition. A helpful analogy is the one I gave before, where with a parent analogy, where it's not that someone is a parent merely because they have properties that are like parents. It's that the term parent originally referred to a biological function, and then over time it referred to other non-biological parents who were relevantly similar to parents in various other important respects. So it referred to people who, while not being biological parents, still were such that it seemed like they should be included in the category of parent.
Hmm.
And so I think similarly with the term woman, it originally referred primarily to biological, to adult human females. But then when people, reflected and realized that didn't meet, their intuitions broadly about what the term meant, that it seems like for various trans women that they're women, it seems like in lots of other cases, uh, uh,
But the, yeah.
then the definition changed. Now, to be clear, I haven't yet, this alone doesn't establish that the position is correct. It could be that the term is not like the word parent. This is just an analogy for how, on my view, it happened. So this is not a reason to think it did happen this way. It's just an explanation of how it did happen. And I think once you see this definition, you come to see, what's wrong with a lot of the objections. Now you're saying, well, the definitions are fixed by reality. There are lots of things in reality. Okay, so um, there are one thing in reality are called chairs, and another thing in reality are tomatoes. Okay, and the term tomato, it picks out the tomato one, not the chair one. It picks out this red fruit rather than picking out four-legged stools that people sit on. And so the question is, so how do we go about determining what, say, the word tomato means? I grant that I agree there are facts about reality, and these facts are not determined by linguistic facts. Um, the question is
Right.
simply,
But
how do we
then,
go about it?
right. But the only reason that the traits that if you have enough of them, you become a woman. The only reason that those traits have that ability to confer womanhood is because they are the traits of females. That's the only reason. On their own, other than the ones you listed that are like being born female, the other ones like having long hair, that's just a social construct that can also be associated with masculinity, in fact. And then that can confer being a man in another culture. So that's
Yeah,
just
I
completely
agree that yeah, I
right,
agree that what factors will positively contribute to what to uh, how many
right.
feminine traits one has will vary from culture to culture. So there are
So
some
then
cultures
what
where
we're really talking about is just trans women are women in the sense that in the semantic sense of that the word so really it should be like trans women are women but women has quotation marks around it because
well,
we're not talking about the literal
David,
reality of
I think I've made this point quite clear. What I think is that the term woman, what I think the term woman refers to people with a sufficient number of feminine traits. I don't think that what it
yes.
really refers to is adult human females, and then there's some second definition of sort of demoted significance, according to which it refers to something else. I just I no,
Yes, you
I know
do.
you.
Yes, you do. You've said that multiple times. You believe that woman refers to females and people with a significant number of feminine traits. And why are those traits feminine? Because they are the traits of females.
I
That's
have
your
not
position.
I have
That's what you
not said
wrote.
that.
I mean, I can read it back to
I
you.
just I'm aware of what I wrote. Okay,
Okay.
like this happened quite a few times
Do you
where
think that the word woman refers to people with a significant number of feminine traits?
yes,
And those traits are feminine because what makes them feminine?
well, what a feminine trait just is a trait that is typically possessed by biological females.
There you go. Females. Okay.
But that
So
doesn't mean. But that doesn't
that's what I
mean.
just said.
The,
And you said
what,
you didn't say that. That's
no,
so okay,
what
we've
you
established that.
what you said I said was that there, the word woman really refers to is biological females, and that there's this second definition of sort of demoted significance.
Well, okay, in
That
your mind it's not okay, fine. They're equal, but the problem with having
no,
them
I think the definition of woman as adult human female, I think that worse fits our linguistic conditions. So I think I give
you would
multiple
remove
arguments.
that from the definition.
Yeah, I don't think that's the right definition.
So it wouldn't so if you look up woman, it wouldn't even have adult human female. It would just have people who have the feminine traits, enough feminine traits.
Yeah,
And then I'm like, oh, that's interesting. What is a feminine trait? A trait of a female. Okay, this is like these are word games. This is silly. If you can't say that a woman isn't female, but it's someone with feminine traits. Well, what are feminine traits? Well, feminine traits are the traits of a female. Okay, well, what's a female?
wait.
Like,
Uh, I mean, I think you and I would give the same definition of the term female.
right.
What our disagreement is
So,
not about what females are. Our disagreement is about what the term woman means.
right,
And
but what I'm saying, did you
if
not
one
hear the
so if
problem in the did you not hear the problem in what I just laid out? If a woman is someone with feminine traits and feminine traits are the traits of a female, then I think female is an important part of your definition of woman. And you're saying,
so
no, that doesn't even
it's
have to be in there.
so it's an important part of the definition of the word woman,
It's the root of the definition.
just like the term, the word justify is an important part of the definition of the word knowledge. But that doesn't mean that knowledge and justification are the same thing. It merely means that the definition of knowledge, part of it involves justification.
Let me put it this way. If you were to remove adult female, as you implied you might want to, your
No, I
definition of
didn't
woman
imply
would
that.
collapse. What?
I didn't
You did.
imply that I want to remove the
Well,
term
I said,
adult
would you
from the
remove it?
word.
And you said, what did you say?
You asked if I would remove it from being the definition of the term woman. I wouldn't remove it as being a word.
No,
My
not
view.
as a word. I mean, would you remove it as being the basis of the definition of woman? And I thought you said, yeah, I would. That doesn't have
Well,
to be in there.
I don't think that that's what I don't think that that's the right definition of the term woman.
Is it the basis of the definition of the word woman?
It's the basis that the phrase "basis of" is ambiguous.
Is
If
it
you
the
mean
root? Is it the foundation? Is it the part from which all the rest of it springs?
like I don't like definitions aren't like gardens. They don't have like one bit from which the other one
Do you
springs.
understand what
Definition
I'm trying to
def,
express to you? And you can rephrase it in
I
any
I
language you want.
I literally don't.
You don't understand the foundation,
I don't
the
understand
root,
what it means to
the
say that
base,
one part of a
the
definition is
core.
the basis.
Uh-huh.
Okay, is the word justification the
Is it the core
basis
of the
of the word
definition?
knowledge?
How about core? Is it the core of the
I
definition?
like if something is part of the definition, is it the core of the definition? Like, I don't know what you mean by the word by core of the definition. It's not like definitions are not like sandcastles where they have what like a base on which the rest is like definitions they have parts to them, and so I think it's part of it. It's one of the terms that's relevant to the definition. It's part of the definition,
Is it the
but
most important part of the definition?
I don't think that there's like if you ask is belief or truth or justified, which of those is the most important part of the definition of knowledge? um, I would say I don't think that there's one that's like the base. I would say that there are multiple different components of the definition.
Okay,
I don't think
except
one
your
is.
definition of woman centers on female.
What
You
do you mean
base
by
it on
what do you mean by
female.
phrase centers on? I use the term female as part of definition.
No, okay, hopefully for the last time. You define woman as someone with feminine traits, and you define feminine traits as the traits of a female. Therefore, it all comes down to female. It's a very simple stepping ladder. It's two
Like
steps. It's not that complicated. It's a
I
woman
don't know what
has
you mean
feminine
by
traits.
I
Feminine
don't know what you
traits
mean
is
by
a
it all
female.
comes down to
So
like
it's pretty simple.
it is a word that is part of the definition. Like um it's an important part of the definition. If you got rid of it, the definition wouldn't work. As is true of lots of words and lots of definitions.
Well, it wouldn't work. If you got rid of it, it wouldn't work anymore
No,
because
I
it would
know
be like a woman
yeah,
is.
that's what I said. I said it
Oh, you
wouldn't
said
work.
it wouldn't work.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it wouldn't work. Yeah, because it's all centered on female.
Yeah, just like if you got rid of, belief from part of the definition of knowledge, it wouldn't work.
And that's not like that though, because it's not like everything about knowledge comes down to belief. Everything about woman is coming down to female. Being a woman means you have feminine traits. Feminine traits are
Uh,
the traits of a female. In other words, being a woman means having the traits of a female. So it's all
um,
about having the traits of
well,
being a female or being like
it's
a
not about
female. That's
having. Yeah, it's about having traits that are like typically associated with females.
right. So
Yeah.
then why is it that having the traits of a thing makes you that thing? Or
Well,
having the traits
I don't think it does because I don't think that trans women I don't think women and female are the same thing.
what you've done is you've taken the word that referred to a category A, and then you've said, okay, but this word should mean any category A, but also anything that is like category A is now also category A.
But
And we should
I'm not saying
expand the word in that sense. And then it
I
sounds as if, and correct me if I'm wrong,
I
it
think
sounds
we're
as if you're
going in
saying, wait,
circles.
I'm not expanding the definition at all. That just is the definition because that's how people use it.
So
But we,
I think we're going in circles. What I what I have not said that a woman that a female is just someone with a sufficient number of female traits. That would be circular. What I claim is that the word woman is distinct from the word female and refers to a person with a sufficient number of feminine traits.
mhm.
And so I'm not using so I'm not saying things with enough traits like X are
Mhm.
X because I'm saying there exists some Y such that things with enough traits like X are Y's. But there's nothing, that's a permissible definition.
You've basically, you're using the word woman as synonymous with feminine. And if you were to say trans women are feminine, well, even that would be debatable. But in many cases, it is true. Trans women are feminine, and maybe even in most cases. I don't know. Not in all cases. But in most cases, trans women are feminine. Okay, and so you're defining woman as basically meaning feminine, having feminine traits, feminine. And if you have enough feminine traits, like if you have one feminine trait, that doesn't mean that you are feminine. But if you
And
have enough feminine traits, you are feminine as a person. And therefore, you're just saying, well, feminine equals woman.
so I think the traits that would go uh, making one feminine would be different from the traits that make go into making one woman. So like it would be, there's some gay men who I think it would be reasonable to describe as feminine, but whom it would not be reasonable to describe as women.
Oh, right. That you're right. Yeah, we talked about that in the beginning. So we're missing the identity component. But once you put that in with everything I just said, then you've got
I,
it.
I agree. I agree that the word woman and the word feminine function similarly, that they both have to do with traits that are typically associated with females, but exactly which traits matter and the weighting of the different traits and how many traits are needed are different.
Right. So so if you're feminine and you identify as a woman, that's it. You're a woman, according to your logic.
Uh,
A
yeah,
feminine
yeah.
person, a woman is a feminine
It,
person who
I
identifies as a woman.
well,
That's it.
that's not the definition, but
No, that is your definition.
no, it's not.
Yes, it
I
clearly is.
no, I've given
We're going
the
in circles around and around. You've said like 10 times a woman is someone with feminine traits, traits of a female, but you have to have the identity component because otherwise gay men would get thrown in, as you just said.
what
So
I've
there's
so what
someone
I've
who identify a woman is someone who identifies as a woman and has a significant number of feminine traits. Those are your
but
words.
I don't think that a woman is someone who identifies as a woman and has a sufficient number of feminine traits. I think a woman is just one who has a sufficient number of feminine traits. And one of the relevant feminine traits that goes into determining whether they're a woman is how they refer to themselves, whether they refer to themselves as she, her, or they,
Identity.
and so on. But so
Identity.
so
You know,
for so for example, I think
am I
Blair
taking
White is
crazy pills?
I think
You so
I
you
think
just listed you
sorry
just took
sorry
identity
sorry
out and put it
sorry
right back
sorry
in.
I think you would have like I think you would be clear on what I'm saying if you don't cut me off when I'm explaining what I'm saying. So, for example,
Go
I
ahead.
think Blair White, I think is of the belief that she is a man. Right? I think her belief is that she's a man who sort of
Hmm.
presents as a woman. I think Blair
Hmm.
White is mistaken about that. So there are cases where people think they're men, and I think they're wrong. So it's not just about so it's not a requirement in all cases that you refer to yourself as a woman to be a woman. And I think or you could imagine a person who's like uh, who took a bunch of drugs and became very confused and is very feminine and refers to themselves as a woman briefly, but generally refers to themselves as a man. I wouldn't say that person is a woman.
But we do agree that identity is a necessary part of the condition of being a woman. Otherwise, you're including a bunch of gay men who don't identify as women. So you have to
I haven't
control for that
what
somehow.
I haven't said that it's a necessary part of it. What I've said is that it's a very sizable contributing factor.
If it's not necessary, we can take it out.
So it's not part of the definition. The definition has to do with feminine traits. One of the relevant feminine traits has to do with how a person refers to themselves.
That's not a feminine trait. How you
It is a
refer to
feminine
yourself
trait.
is not a
It is,
feminine.
it is a feminine trait as used stipulatively in the definition. Where feminine traits are just traits that are typically associated with women and that sort of cause people to think of one as a woman, right? So like if you interact with someone, one of the things that affects in sizable ways whether they think of someone as a woman is whether they
How
refer
you
to them.
identify with yourself, the fact that you have an identity or that you identify in a certain way is not a feminine trait because if we were talking about men, then we would be calling it a masculine trait. So it's a feminine trait and a masculine trait? It's neither. It's neutral. It's just having an
So
identity. So
as
the
I've
but
as
the
I've
way that
as
you
I've as I've described, I think that the term. So I'm using the term feminine traits and masculine traits stipulatively, so slightly different way from how they're typically used. So given the way I'm using them, they would be
Mhm.
included under feminine traits and masculine traits because they're traits that are typically associated with women. So
What is
women
typically
tend to
associated with feminine? You're saying that thinking of yourself as a woman is a typically feminine trait?
Yeah. So women tend to think, women.
Okay.
If there's a woman and you ask, what pronouns do you use at one of these, woke gender circles, where people go around using
Okay.
their pronouns.
Okay, fine. That's
Women
fine.
would
We don't need to
typically
get
refer to themselves using she, her
fine.
pronouns. So we can. So can we go through some of the reasons? I don't have like that much time left. I want to go kind of soon because I have some
Yeah,
stuff I
but
need to
just
do.
to be clear, so the definition is, in fact, someone with feminine traits who thinks of themselves as, so a woman is someone with feminine traits who thinks that they're a woman, except not only is that, I think, a terrible definition, but you've also left out all of the trans people who don't have feminine traits. So they're not trans
So
anymore,
so
even though
so
they
as
might identify as trans because they
so
don't have any
so
feminine
so
traits.
as I said, that is not the definition, and I've explained why that's not the definition. I could go over it again, but I don't think we made very much progress there. Um, Now,
You
I would
just, you literally just
regarding
said they think of themselves as women and that's a
regarding,
feminine trait. You literally just said they think of themselves as women and that's a feminine
but
trait.
I
And I
didn't
didn't
say
want to
that. I
debate
didn't
that
say
because
that.
that's kind of
I didn't
silly,
say that.
but
I didn't say that referring to oneself as a woman. I agree that that is a feminine trait. What I did not agree with is that that's a sufficient is a necessary condition for one to be a woman.
you did
Now,
say that it has to be in there, otherwise we have gay men in there. And we don't, so you have to
no,
solve for that. How do
I
you solve
didn't
for that?
say
If
I
you have
didn't say
very
I
effeminate,
didn't say I didn't say that it has to be like I
no,
didn't say
I'm
that it
saying that
has
it
to
has
be.
to be in there. I'm saying that it has to be in there because if you don't have any, if you don't have any mention of how someone identifies and your definition is simply having a lot of feminine traits, then suddenly a lot of gay men who have a lot of feminine traits, now they're women.
But that's not true if you think that one of the features that's relevant in determining this has to do with the biological characteristics that one exhibits, and another of the relevant traits has to do with how one refers to themselves. And
What do
so
you
gay
mean
men
by a lot? How
who
one
possess
refers to
who possess
oneself?
who possess sorry, can I finish the point? So who possess male bio so if there's a person who possesses male biology and
Hmm.
refers to themselves using he him pronouns and you know
Hmm.
uh, as a man, I think even if
Hmm.
this person is very very feminine, I think these would be enough by themselves to make them a man.
Would that be part of the definition?
No, the definition, as I've described several times, is that a man is someone with sufficient number of masculine traits.
Okay, so how is the fact that they refer to themselves as a man factoring into this so that you understand that they're not a
Because
woman,
as
even though
used,
they,
because
hold
as
on, even though they meet your definition of woman?
because well, no, they don't meet my definition of woman because, as used stipulatively, the term woman includes like one of the traits that's included in the term feminine traits is how one refers to themselves.
Jesus Christ, dude, is how you refer to yourself part of the definition or not?
Okay, so it's not
Is it
part of the
part of the
definition.
definition or
It
not?
is not. It's not part of the definition, but it is one of the traits that goes into determining whether or not someone counts as a woman. So here's an analogy. Um,
Okay, so it's not part of the
part
definition, but
part
it
part of
helps determine
sorry.
whether or just
So
for me, just so I can understand this, right? Because we're going around and around in circles. So just let me, if you don't mind. So it's not part of the definition. Okay, fine, whatever. But it is part of what determines whether or not we're going to say this is a woman.
right, because
Okay, so what
the
determines
definition
whether or
makes
not we say this is a
because
woman is having
sorry.
feminine
Can I
traits and identifying as a woman.
like
Yes?
if you're confused about what my position is, like it might help if you didn't cut me off repeatedly when I was trying to explain what my position is. Okay, so
Hey,
here's
with all due respect, you've been cutting me off nonstop and you're very sensitive about being cut off. I don't think those two
like
traits go well together. Let me just,
so I
if you
mean
don't mind,
I
if you
agree
don't
we've both
mind,
been cutting each other off a decent amount. And I
yes, and
didn't
I haven't been complaining about it because you said
you
you
know
wanted to do it in this way. You wanted to have this back and forth, and that's fine. But then you're very sensitive every time I speak over you. I apologize for that, by the way,
I
if
mean
I'm speaking.
it's all
But
right.
then you can't also
I'm just
simultaneously be hypersensitive about it.
so I don't mind being cut off in general. I'm just saying if like you currently I think are confused about my position. And I think you think you're confused about my position. Either that or you think my position is just
I
clearly
think you're
different from
confused
yours.
about your position.
Okay.
I think
And
you're
so
not being clear because you keep
okay, so maybe
saying what determines a woman is having a significant number of feminine traits. And part of what determines, being not definition, because you don't want it in the definition, that's fine. But part of what determines it is also how you identify. So if you had a very feminine gay man, we would have to also consider the fact that he doesn't identify as a woman. And then we would not therefore go around calling him a woman. That seems
right.
pretty straightforward to me. Is
So
that
what I was saying what I was saying was that I don't, I think it's fine to, to interject, we're not giving, like, back to back full on speeches. It's fine to interject when you have a point. But just if you want to understand what my position is, when I'm explaining the point, probably it's not productive to cut me off. Okay. So regarding the position, so like here's an analogy that I think will be helpful. The definition of heat is not how near something is to fire. Okay, but how near something is to fire will typically positively contribute to how hot something is. So I think similarly, the definition of the term woman, it makes reference to this thing, feminine traits. And then one of the things that goes into determining how many feminine traits one has is how one refers to oneself.
Okay, so how you refer to yourself is an important part of this.
Yes, it is an important part of whether or not a person is a woman, but
Okay.
it's not explicitly built into the definition.
Okay, that's fine. It doesn't have to be in the whatever, however you're defining
Okay,
definition is, we don't have to get into that. We're deep enough in the weeds. All
yeah,
I'm trying to
I was
say,
just clarifying.
all I'm trying to say is the things that are determining this, which I'm going to call that a definition, you don't have to. The things that are determining this are having feminine traits and thinking you're a woman. So we are saying that if we're going to call person A woman, they need to be feminine and they need to say that they're a woman. That's what makes
No,
you. So a woman is anyone who identifies as a woman and is feminine. Now that leaves out all of the non-feminine trans women, which is kind of a problem. That also means that this is a bit circular because it's just feminine people who say that a woman is a feminine person who says they're a woman. Okay.
okay, so as
Okay.
I as I've
I
now
mean,
explained like 5 times, that's not the definition. Okay,
I,
that's
I
one.
said I wasn't, I said, I very clearly said, you're
No,
not
but
calling it a
sure,
definition,
sure.
but these are
But when you
things
say,
that
yeah,
determine whether we call you a woman.
yeah,
I'll call it a definition
right.
because I think that's
So
what definitions do, but I don't
yeah,
want to get into that semantic issue because that's
but
a side.
what you said, my view is that what a woman is someone who has a sufficient number of feminine traits and uh, and refers to themselves as a woman. Now, as I've
Those
explained,
those are
that's
determining factors, right? That's what you said.
right.
Those are the things that will
So
determine whether we think of them as a woman. Yes.
I agree that those are determining factors. Well,
Okay.
I think the determining factor is feminine traits, and part of what determines the number of feminine traits is how one refers to oneself. Okay, um,
But you
but
defined feminine trait as traits of a female
that's right.
earlier.
Traits,
Right.
yeah, traits that are typically associated with females.
Okay, then.
Um,
Yeah. So I think
so, so where you misstated my position is I don't think that to be a woman, one has to call oneself a woman. And I gave the example of Blair White, who I think Blair White doesn't think she's a woman. And my view is, on my view, I think Blair White is mistaken. Um,
Okay.
but
Okay. Right.
so I think that was an error. Now, regarding the other point about how this won't include all trans people, I would actually agree, right? So I think that there are some trans people who just as the term is commonly used, I don't think would count as women. Uh, I think that you ought most likely you ought to still refer to them using she/her pronouns and so on. Like you ought to still be polite. But on my definition, there are some trans women who won't count as a woman. So if 5 minutes from now I just called myself a woman, I do not think I would become a woman. There might be reasons to refer to me as a woman for reasons of kindness, but I don't think I would become a woman.
Right.
Right. So I just bite the bullet regarding the second point. But sorry, can we talk about some of the reasons? I think.
Hmm.
Or wait, I should probably go in like 15 minutes. But yeah, we can talk about some of the reasons to favor the definition. Okay. Um, so one of the points I raised in favor of the definition is that there
Are we
do
talking
seem to
about
be
the original
cases.
essay now?
Yeah.
Okay.
So there do seem to be cases where um, a person is like is not biologically female, but we think of them as a woman. Okay, so one case is like suppose we took your mind and we uploaded it into a robot body. So it was no longer composed of any of the same cells. But it was your mind. It was you. You continue to exist. You remain psychologically continuous. And
Hmm.
suppose that in addition, this robot it had male secondary sex characteristics. So it had male genitalia.
Right.
It looked like a male, but it just
Okay.
it wasn't a biological organism. Okay, so this remains you. Um,
Okay.
would you say in this case um, that uh, that um, that you would have stopped being a man?
No. I mean, I'm still
Okay,
me,
but
right?
yeah, but you're not male anymore because you don't have any male biology.
Well, yes, I do. I have my brain.
No, in this case, I was stipulating you don't have your brain, so the idea is that. we take like the informational content in your mind and we upload it onto a computer. Okay, so it's
Oh,
still you.
okay.
Imagine that it remains you, like just whatever your theory of personal identity is. Let's imagine it remains you. You continue to exist,
Well, no,
but
I'm not a man. I'm not male. I'm code.
um, right. Even if you're this like robot who uh,
Yeah.
is male biology and is the same, this is still you. You would think that you would have stopped being a man.
Yeah. I would think that I had stopped being a man and turned into something non-human. No part of me is. I mean, well, maybe there's some part of
Like
me that's
even
kind of.
even
Go ahead. Hello. Yeah. Go ahead.
sorry, you cut out for a second, so I missed the end of your answer.
Oh, I was saying that I'm no longer. I mean, I guess there's like, and again, this is where we're getting into, I think, the point that I think you're making with woman. There's like a more metaphorical way in which I'm still human because I have, sort of human traits, but I'm not actually human anymore. I'm not actually a male. I'm not a man. I'm not even human. I'm now digital code. I'm no more human than ChatGPT at this point. But because I have some traits of humanity, or because it'd be more accurate to say, because this code has traits of David, and David was a human, and so this code is human like. And therefore, we probably talk about it as a human, and we probably say that's a man, that's David, whatever. But that's not
Yeah.
really
So
a
so I
human
I was yeah,
because humans aren't code.
so I was stipulating that this being remained identical to you. Like I was just saying, like there
Hmm.
are different theories about what determines whether something's you over time. So, there's some theories in which what determines that it's like that it has your soul
Sure,
or something.
sure,
Some theories in which it's psychological, just whatever it has. The idea is it's
sure.
supposed to still be you. In this case, I don't
Okay.
know.
Well,
I
anyway,
have pretty
I'll
strong.
go along with it just for the sake of the argument. So, okay, let's say
Yeah.
that this is pretty much me, and I'm okay. It's me. So, okay,
Right. So in a case where like, you were uploaded into a robot body, you know, that looked identical to you, okay, but just had
okay. Yep,
just didn't
yep,
have biology. It would seem
yep.
very strange to say that you'd stopped being a man.
Yeah,
You are
it
now
would.
transgender. Um,
Yeah, it would be weird. It would be. I get that, but then
so
doesn't
I
that
think that the
mean?
counterintuitiveness of the definition.
Yeah, but that just means that your definition is coming down to like it feeling weird because the person doesn't seem, they don't seem like a robot. That seems like a human. They've got warm skin and everything. Like, let's say it's a very realistic body suit that they put me in. And you're like,
So
oh, well, yeah, it's very convincing. Just like your definition, having a lot of feminine traits can make it very convincing that a person is a woman or slash adult female. But that
so
doesn't mean that just because you're very, very similar to a thing or you have a lot of traits of the female, that therefore you are that thing. And I might have a lot of traits of, it might seem really weird and rude um, to say like that's not a human, that's not David, that's not a man, because you're looking at it. It just feels, it's sort of in the same way. And you make this point, I think, in your essay, that it just feels off if you're sitting in front of a trans woman who is very feminine and you're going to throw masculine pronouns in that person's face, and not only are you being disrespectful or not only being rude, but doesn't it just at a gut level feel off? Doesn't your normal intuition want to call such a person a she because of all of the reasons in front of your eyes? And yeah, sure, yeah, of course, that's natural.
yeah,
And if they don't tell you that they're trans, you probably, if you were asked, you would probably not only say that's a woman, you would probably say that's a female because
right.
all of your into right. But what I'm saying is that's not, that doesn't speak to whether they are. That speaks to whether they gave you a very
Yeah.
convincing
So
impression that they are based on having
so
certain traits that are associated with female.
okay,
That's
so I
different.
agree. So I don't think that it's right to say that this is just about like um, well, okay.
Etiquette.
So I agree. This is about um, this comes down to our linguistic intuition. Here's how I see this as being similar to. So imagine we're arguing about the definition of a chair, and you say, well, chair is something that people normally sit on. And replies, well, people normally sit on a horse. Okay, Now, in response, people, a person could say, well, could say something roughly like what you said. They say, well, okay, but you shouldn't trust your linguistic intuitions. It's weird that that's a chair, but that's just because we don't normally think of horses as chairs. But the point is, we would say no, that's not a chair because the way that people actually use the term chair does not include horses. Like you're just giving the wrong account of how people talk
I don't know if
in order
I don't know,
to enhance
man.
their insufficient condition.
I would
And
like.
so,
Go ahead. Sorry,
so
sorry to cut you off.
and so I'd say, yeah, I'd say a similar thing about this case. But so I'd ask you, like, what's the difference between the case of Blair White or Buck Angel and the case of a horse regarding our linguistic intuition? That sounds bad out of context. Um, what's the difference between Buck Angel or Blair White and a horse? Um, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I wanted to. Well, I never got to hear you finish your science fiction example. So you asked me, and I was like about the robot thing, and I was like, well, no, I'm code. I'm not a human at that point. But I think that's kind of unfair to you because I'm not letting you get to the point you're trying to make with that. So I want to just play along with it for a minute, and I just want to be like, okay, fine. So let's just say that my intuitions are locked in. I'm like, yeah, I'm a human, and people are like, yeah, you're humans. Okay, I wanted to hear where you were going with the rest of that because
Oh,
that example
I
you're
was saying,
giving comes back to trans eventually, right? So
oh,
what's
sorry,
the
sorry,
trans argument
this,
of?
so this was supposed to be a counterexample to the idea that uh, a man is an adult male, adult human male, because the idea is that, well, you in your robot body, you wouldn't be an adult human male. Um,
Oh, I see. I
you
see.
certainly wouldn't be male, but
I
it
get it.
seems like you'd still be a man. Just like I think the
Well, my
Superman
answer to you would
scenario.
be I don't think that moves me from my position because my answer to you would be technically I would be a man at that point. I'm just digital code. That's not actually a man. And the code is identical to the thought patterns of David, but this is code and therefore not a human and therefore not a man, but it's sort of a man in the sense that this is an example you gave that I actually liked that you put in the essay is a good one. You were talking about like Superman, and I was like, "That's cool. I'm a big Superman fan." But like, if we're being technical, Superman is not a man because Superman is an alien, right? It's not even a human. But you look at him, he looks like a human. He's very human-like. He acts like a human. It would be weird to not to call him super. It would be weird to call him like super other thing or super alien or he looks like a
Super
man.
they them.
Yeah, super non-man or whatever. But if we're having a technical conversation about, well, okay, sure, we call him man because I mean he just kind of like looks like one, but is he really a man? Is he actually literally no, no, he's from another planet.
So
So,
you
and the
can
same
always
thing with the robot example, I might be in a human suit, and you might be like, well, that's a man. Your gut instinct, you just want to call that a man, but technically speaking, that's a robot. Nope. There's not a single human cell in the entire thing. Not even the brain. Gone. It's just digital code. So no, that's not
so
a man anymore.
you can always hold on to a definition even in the face of a counterexample. Like if a counterexample comes out, you can always just like stick to your intuition, even if it seems to have a weird implication in the case. But just like it would be irrational, clearly, to do that in the horse case to say, oh, well, I guess a horse just is a chair. You'd say, no, I have the wrong account of what a chair is because this account implies things that I find really counterintuitive.
I
And
mean,
so
these.
and so
Sorry.
the question is like, so if you in the horse case treat the fact that a horse is not a chair to falsify that example, like what's different about the case of trans women or the case of Superman or the case of uh, you
Robot.
when your brain is uploaded to a robot body that looks exactly like you. It has
Right.
identical secondary sex characteristics and it's numerically identical to you.
Right. I mean, I would be a man in, like I said before, when I'm a robot, I would be a man in a figurative sense because I have the qualities of humanity still, but I'm not a human. But I would have human-like qualities. And so you could say, well, this person has humanity in a sort of poetic, metaphorical sense. This person has humanity, but this robot is not literally a human. There's no DNA over here. So, and that's sort of what we're doing now. We're sort of saying like, well, if you have the qualities of woman, you kind of like metaphorically sort of like, you're a woman, but the then, and we're on the same page there, and we're on the same page by saying that trans women are not females. But then when we're not on the same page is where you say, okay, so you can agree with me that they're women in this sort of metaphorical sense, but it's not metaphorical. They're really women. And I'm like, what do you mean really? If you mean really, like, okay, so you're
So
saying that the
so
metaphor is
sorry.
literal. Okay, so
So
the
I've
metaphor is
I've
literal.
yeah, I've asked you now, I think a few times, like what the difference is between the horse case and the case of the apparent counterexamples to like if you grant that that we at least have the intuition that Superman is a man and so on, then if there's if there's a definition you give and it just conflicts with strongly held intuition, like normally we would give that up unless there's some really strong reason to hold it.
Wait a minute.
But I don't think there is.
Our intuition about
So
Superman being a man is based on the fact that he resembles a man. Quite obviously, something can resemble something and not be that thing.
okay, so
So
sorry,
the argument that, well,
wait,
the argument that, like,
sorry.
well, if our intuitions are telling us that he's a man, like, well, then shouldn't we change the definition of man to include things that are literally not men because they've basically they resemble those things? Well, I mean,
But I don't think they are literally not meant. Like I think Superman, were he to exist, I think he would be a man. So here's maybe okay. Here's another case that's a little more parallel because it goes the opposite direction. So you give the definition of a chair as something you sit on. Someone replies, no, I don't think that's a good definition because imagine a chair that just someone put spikes on. Well, you wouldn't sit on it, but it would still be a chair. And the
uh-huh.
person so that would still be a chair. And so you would just say, well, my original definition of what a chair is was wrong. I was mistaken. A chair is just something you sit on because you wouldn't sit on this thing with spikes, but it would still be a chair. Um, but you could, of course, the person could say exactly the same things you're saying. They could say it's well, resembles. It resembles. It's not literally a chair, but it resembles a chair. But the point is, they wouldn't say any of that because we have the intuition that it doesn't just resemble a chair. No, it's actually a chair. And so like
But
why
you're
why
giving a
aren't we saying
definition
this?
where you start by giving a terrible definition of chair to make your point. If we had a terrible definition of woman, then I guess the two examples would be more aligned.
But
But
the way we figure out that the definition is terrible is that we find a case where, and I agree, this definition of chair is much worse than your definition of woman, right? But the way but like the principle is the same, where the way you figure out that it's a that it's a chair
mhm.
is uh, is that you start with sorry, the way you figure out that the definition is terrible is you realize that if that definition were right, it would imply certain things that are false. It would imply that things that are not chairs are chairs, and things that are really chairs are not chairs, like the spiked chair.
Right, right.
Um, and so I what I don't see is how your reply, like that a person who thinks that a chair is just something you sit on could give a very similar set of sentences in response to the counterexample about the spiked chair. And they would say, well, it's not literally a chair. It's just we think that naturally is a chair because it resembles a chair. It's a chair in air quotes because it's like a
Mhm.
chair. But when you want to say, well, it's literally a chair, then you're acting in error. We would all agree, like that person's being ridiculous because we have the intuition that no, it doesn't just resemble a chair. It is a chair. Um, and so
This starts to
the
feel
rest of
like postmodernist soup to me. It's almost as if you're getting towards saying nothing is anything until we all just sort of collectively decide that it is. And until then, like there is no literally anything. Nothing is literally anything because we can always just, 10 years
so
later,
that is not
call it
what I
something
was saying.
else.
That is not in the same galaxy as what I was saying.
Then what are you
So
saying?
so what I was saying was in the case of the chair, you might have an initial definition of the word chair, okay,
Hmm.
and then you come across a case where you have the definition of a chair as something you sit on, and then you come across an apparent counterexample. You come across a thing that you sit on where people have the intuition that it's not a chair, and so you and I
Okay.
agree that the right response there is to say, okay, that's the wrong definition of the word chair because it's falsified by that counterexample.
All right.
Um, and so my claim is similarly, you should start with a definition of, if you start with a definition of woman as adult human female, if that's what you initially think it is, then when you come across cases where this implies really counterintuitive things, like that if your brain was uploaded, you would stop being a man, like that Superman's not a man, like that
Hmm.
certain, very
Yeah.
well passing trans men are not men. And at some point you should just say, look, because this implies counterintuitive things, my definition is wrong. Now your response to
Why
that
why
was
do we
your
assume that the intuitions are correct?
what I'm asking is what's the difference between where we assume it in the chair case and where we assume it in the case of the word woman?
Well, why are we assuming that any of these intuitions are correct?
So I think the way we figure out what words mean is we rely on early linguistic intuition. But what I'm trying to get from you is an explanation of what the difference, why we should reject the chair definition as a thing you sit on after hearing these counterexamples, but we shouldn't reject the woman definition after
The
hearing these apparent counterexamples.
Well, the chair definition isn't really working for me. I don't think that that's a persuasive. But so if we can bring it back to I mean, if we can use what
So
you're saying about the chair and the horse and just talk about females, you're saying that you're saying that, okay, we have this definition of woman that means adult female. Okay. But then we have, in the past 10 years or so, we've had a lot of sort of attention and awareness of trans women. And a lot of our, can I say, would it be right to say social intuitions interacting with trans people or seeing them go to the bathroom or misgendering a trans woman to her face? These things sort of go against our social intuitions about what feels right. And when you have a word that just it feels like you're using it wrongly if you were to stick with the old definition, that probably means you need to update your definition.
right. So right. So
Is that
yeah.
correct?
I don't even know. I don't know if I would grant that the right definition of the word woman used to be adult human female. Like, I don't know. I think it's hard. I agree that that's certainly what has traditionally been believed to be the right definition. But I would imagine even in those cases, people would still have the intuition that say Superman is a man. But not the
Okay.
same. But
Historically,
I don't think that's super relevant. But so what I'm saying is just look in the chair case. If you agree that suppose a person thought that a chair was just something you sit on, if you pointed them out to them that a thing with spikes is a chair with spikes, you wouldn't sit on it. Like this chair, this seat that I'm currently on, if it had a bunch of
mhm,
spikes, you wouldn't sit on it, but it would still be
right,
a chair. I
right.
agree that after hearing that counter argument, they should then say, "Oh yeah, my definition was wrong."
Uh, yeah, that chair example. How does that go back to female?
But sorry, can you just answer the question?
Repeat the question.
The question is, if a person thought that a chair was something you sit on, and then you pointed out, look, if a standard chair got a bunch of spikes, you wouldn't sit on it, but it would still be a chair. Do you
Right.
agree that
The
the
problem
person
is
should
the
give
origin.
do you I'm not do you agree that the person should give up the definition because of that counterexample? Like the person should think, oh, that's a good point. I guess this isn't the right definition of a chair because of that
Yeah,
counterargument.
exactly.
Okay, so can you explain why the person should give that up in light of that counterexample?
Because the original definition was flawed, and the counterexample
But why is
illustrates
it a
this.
so why does it illustrate that it's flawed?
Because the original definition would include something that's not a chair, and when they're shown something that's
So
not
how
a
do you
chair and they
know?
realize that it's not a chair, then they have to update their original definition. Otherwise, they're going to have
Yeah.
sitting on spikes or something.
And so how do you know that that's not a chair?
What do you mean?
Like how do you go about determining that that's not a chair?
Well,
Like suppose the person in
in this
response said,
case,
suppose the person in response said something very similar to what you said in response to the apparent counterexample that I've given you, or what they said is, look, the chair with spikes, it's not really a chair.
mhm,
It's just sort of like a chair for most normal
right,
purposes. It resembles
right.
a chair, but it's not really a chair.
Mhm.
Okay, so they could say very similar things to things you would say. Can you explain why would that person be wrong?
Well, because chairs have a what we might call a telos, right? Like they're functional objects. They're created
And
for human comfort and sitting. That's what chairs are for. Unless you're trying to make an argument that we could call anything a chair because language can, we could all collectively decide to call guitars chairs, which is true. We could do that. But the actual object, not the word, not the label, but the actual the referent is for comfort and sitting. And so if you're going to put spikes on it, that no longer qualifies.
wait, sorry, you think that a chair with spikes just stops being a chair?
I think that it can be. I think that that's how definitions can evolve. Yes,
But
but
so like
again, this is why.
I'm currently sitting on a chair. Suppose that I just put a bunch of spikes over the thing I'm sitting on. Would it then stop being a chair?
No, Not in my,
Okay,
no, I don't
so
think so.
right, so you agree that a thing can be a chair even if it's not something you sit on. Okay, but suppose that a person who thought that a chair is something you sit on, you gave them this counterexample. You said, look,
Right.
you could have a normal chair with spikes, and then it wouldn't be, you wouldn't sit on it, but it would still be a chair.
Sure.
Um, like,
Then
do
you
you,
would be defining chair by the shape or some, like a piece of furniture that has
yeah,
four legs or whatever. Sure.
yeah, I don't, I'm not asking you to like give any, like it's actually famously tricky to give like a precise definition of the word chair. There are like,
Yeah.
anytime you think you have one, there's some counterexample that slips through your fingers. I'm just saying, so if, so you agree that a person who thought a chair was a thing you sit on should give up their belief after hearing this definition, right?
Right. Well, okay. Right. Let's go with right. Sure.
Yeah. So what I'm asking is, can you explain why that person, just can you give me the explanation of why that person should give up that definition in response to that counterexample? Because and so just to explain where I'm going with this, I can give you my account of this. My account of this would be, well, the reason they should give up their definition is that um, that their definition, like, it doesn't fit our linguistic intuitions about what chairs are, so they should give it up. And I would say similarly with your definition, it doesn't fit our linguistic intuitions about what a man is, so we should give it up. So I'm just trying to get to understand what is it, what is the reason why we should give up the chair definition, but we shouldn't
One
give up the
problem
man
is,
definition.
well, one problem with this is that chairs are just things that we make, and we can make them to be like anything we want them to be. I can make a chair that has a tree coming out of it. I can make a chair with 50 legs or one leg. I can
Right.
make
So
I can make a chair in any way that I want. I cannot make a female be something other than a female. I can't like play with maybe in the future, but right now like we don't have that kind of the best thing that we can do with the category of adult female slash woman is to approximate it and have someone who's not in that category have a lot of the traits of that thing, which is
so
kind of like
uh,
having the ability to warp and bend and do everything you want with a chair and change it in all these different ways so that the definition is like super malleable, but you're not actually working with the same materials. So
yeah.
we don't actually have the ability to change femaleness in all of the ways that we can play with chair and then still have
So
it be a chair because we
I agree that there are like many differences between chairs and women. One difference, chairs tend to have four legs. Women tend to have two
there's a
legs.
couple jokes in here, I'm sure, but what's the difference
Um,
between a um
yeah.
but
But
sorry, you go.
what
You
I'm
go.
asking is, so there's a linguistic principle, and it's not specific to chairs. We can give other examples. You can give the example of knowledge. You can give the example of uh, I mean, it's hard to think of other examples off the top of my head, but like suppose you could give the example of like cereal, or sorry, of soup, where suppose a person says soup is something that has liquid in it and solids floating, and then you say, oh, so what about cereal? And they say, oh, yeah, so I guess my definition of soup was incorrect because it would imply that cereals are soups. In all these cases, what you do is you start with a definition that you think applies to all and only cases of the term,
Mm,
and then you hear, well, actually, there's a case that would say is a soup, but then you have the intuition that it's not, so you give that definition.
right. When
And so
you say intuition,
what I'm trying to understand is just what, why is it legitimate to reject the definition of soup based on linguistic intuitions about cereal, to
uh-huh,
reject our intuitions about chairs based on our definitions of
because
about spike
because
chairs, but
yeah,
not about women, and merely pointing out other extraneous differences between the word woman and the word chair doesn't explain why there's a difference in terms of whether our linguistic intuitions are relevant.
because the category of woman is tethered to biology. And so there's only so much we can do with the
But
definition
you see that
unless we
do you
want
see that
to.
that's begging the question?
No,
Like
it's
the
not
entire
begging the
like
question. No, it's not begging the question. It's just descriptive.
but
I
the point
mean,
in dispute is whether it's just a biological term. Like suppose that the chairperson in response said, well,
well, wait a minute. No,
suppose the
it's
chairperson
not
said
that's
in
not the point in
suppose
dispute though, because all right, let me rephrase that. Female. Okay? Female is not
suppose yeah
it's tethered
suppose
to the word female. That's not in
okay
dispute, right?
okay
Right.
yeah
And
but
your
it has to
definition
do
of woman is someone with female traits.
yeah, it's
Female.
tethered to in the sense that it like has to do with it, right? So suppose the chairperson said, they said, oh, Well, the reason is that a chair is about the thing you sit on. And they say, and even on other definitions, it's tethered to what you sit on. And then other
But there are
definitions of chair
exceptions to that.
will presumably. And how do you know that there are exceptions to that?
Because the platonic concept of a chair is not something you could sit on. I think we can
But
all
how do you
agree
know?
that,
But how?
like you said,
I so I yes, I do agree with that.
right?
But what I'm saying is that the same things that make it like I'm saying the same ways that we know that chair is not something you sit on are also how we know that the term woman doesn't just refer to an
But
adult
a
human
chair is
being.
not a naturally created object. We get to make it in any shape, way, or form that we desire. That's what makes it such a
But my
sloppy
point is
thing
that you
to.
can. But my point is that the same idea will applies to lots of other things that are not naturally created objects. There's no
But
reason
not
why whether it's a
females.
naturally and there's no
But not
reason why whether
females.
it's and there's no reason why whether it's a naturally created object would affect whether we should trust our linguistic intuition about the term.
I would. That's the point of that's one of the points of disagreement that we have. When you're discussing linguistic intuitions, right? You're saying because that's what all of this you're trying to sort of get me to express my intuitions. You're saying that like the linguistic intuitions that we have about woman, um, what is an example of such an intuition? Because I think in the essay you mentioned a few things like,
Yeah.
you
So
know,
there examples. So
specific
I gave some
examples with regard to trans women.
yeah. So I gave some of the examples that I think are counterexamples to your definition. So one of the counterexamples rather, is that um, that your definition would imply that um, that a if your brain were transported into a robot body, it were uploaded so that it didn't have the original cells, that you would stop being a man. That doesn't seem right, even if that's secondary sex
It doesn't seem
characteristics.
right. You're correct, but the word "seem" being the operative word there, it doesn't seem right.
I agree that seem is the operative word, but it's just like in the chair case, like the way
Like,
you the way that you go about figuring out that that a chair is distinct from that a chair isn't something you sit on. Is you there are cases where you hear of things you note that there are things that you sit on that don't seem like chairs, and so you say, oh, so a chair isn't something you sit on. But in that case, you're trusting neurolinguistic intuitions. I don't see
yeah,
why, if you
but
trust your
I'm
linguistic
also
intuitions about chair, and if you trust your linguistic intuitions about cereal, you trust your linguistic intuitions about
yeah,
knowledge,
except for one
why you would.
difference. One major difference is that I'm willing to acknowledge that my linguistic intuitions can be incorrect, and you don't seem to be willing to do that. You seem to think that your linguistic intuitions are perfect about everything.
No, no,
Because
I
if
don't.
they're flawed, if they're possibly flawed, then the immediate question becomes, okay, so maybe all of these linguistic intuitions that we have, like, well, he seems like a man, even though there's not a single human cell in his body because it's a robot, seems like a man is actually incorrect assumption. Or, well, that seems like a woman because the person has long hair, which is a trait you listed, or they have painted nails, which is a trait you listed. But it turns out it's not a woman. Oh, so my linguistic intuition was wrong. But what
So
you say is no, we should follow linguistic intuitions, and that should be how we define words, and that should be the end of it. And what I'm saying is, well, sometimes, yes, maybe with things like chair, perhaps, but in other cases, maybe we shouldn't follow our linguistic intuitions. Maybe defining woman on the basis of what basically comes down to like an ick factor, like, ugh, that feels rude if I misgender someone, and it feels rude if I like try to stop some person who looks female from going into the woman's bathroom after my 5-year-old daughter because, oh, I noticed they have a beard. This is actually like a dude, and I'm not comfortable with that. Oh no, that makes me feel icky. Like it's this ick factor. That's the intuition, and that we should define woman based on that. And I just
right,
think
so
that's a
there
that's a
there's
not that's not the best
so
way to do it.
there's a difference between the ick factor about using how you would like an ick factor about feeling revulsion about using the term a particular way, and just your linguistic intuitions about whether it seems that the term applies.
I understand the
I
difference.
I would I would sorry, you talk for a bit. Sorry, let me just make a few points. So I would agree that our linguistic intuitions are fallible. Like I think we can be wrong in our linguistic intuitions. But I think like as an analogy, I think our vision is also fallible. Sometimes people see things that aren't there. But if you and I are arguing about whether there's a bridge in this distance, we're going to be relying on the things that we see. our intuitions are the primary way we go about determining terms, even if our individual linguistic intuitions can be wrong. Um, so, but sorry, I know I'm sort of hammering this point a lot, but what I fundamentally don't get is you agree that our linguistic intuitions are, they can be used in the case of knowledge to disbar definitions. You agree they can be used in the case of soup. You agree they can be used in the case of chairs. You agree they can be used in a whole range of cases. And what I'm trying to understand is why can't they be used in this case? Now, what you said
Well,
in
those
response to
cases,
this,
because those
wait,
cases are
wait,
not
wait, wait,
alike.
wait, 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 wait. What you said in response to this is that the difference is that I think my linguistic intuitions are infallible. So I don't think they're infallible. I just think they're reliable and they're how we go about figuring out something's a counterexample. Um, so
These
yeah,
these cases that you're giving are not alike. I said that,
I
but I'll say it
so
again. They're different in
so
the
no,
way that chairs are something that we create and we can create them any way we want. They're not like electrons, for example. So if you were going to compare electrons, that's a better comparison. If you were going to have compare electrons, then we would have a very different conversation. Then it would be like, well, then they're really the definition of electron is not that flexible at all.
okay,
It's not based on our linguistic intuitions. In fact, we don't really have a lot of linguistic intuitions about electron because we don't daily discuss this very much. So, and it's not something that we get to create in any way, shape, or form we please. So it's tethered to a scientific fact in the way that woman is tethered to a scientific fact by your own definition, by the way.
yeah. So
Whereas chair
suppose
is, it's like you could call it like a work of art, and it can be, it's
yeah.
very
So
flexible
I
what a
think
chair
I
can
think
be.
I've explained that you're not understanding my position correctly. But putting that aside, um, so in the case of
It boils
electrons,
down to
so
female.
so
We went
so
over that
in
like 20 times.
so
It
so in
boils
the
down to
case
female.
no, but that's not my definition. The
Yes, it
definition
is.
uses
You said
no
it is
my
having feminine traits, and feminine traits are
sorry.
defined as
So
traits of a female. Female, we
so my
both
def, so
agree
my def, so
so
my definition
I
uses
need
the
to like
term
write that
female.
and pin it to the top of this
My
discussion.
definition, but like the problem is I give the definition, and then you claim that I said lots of things that I didn't say. So I agree. My definition uses the term female, but my definition does not just say that a woman is a female. Just as
No, I didn't say that
the
you
word
said a woman is a female. I said that, and this is what you said. A woman is someone who has a significant number of feminine traits. And you
yeah,
define
that's right.
feminine traits as traits of a
Okay,
female.
yeah, I would agree with
So,
that characterization.
all right,
So
perfect. There we
okay,
go.
but
Now that
but
right
then
there, we should just like print that and staple it to the top because that's what I've been
okay,
saying this whole time.
so so in the case of uh, so you say the difference between woman regarding whether we can trust our linguistic intuitions and the term
Yeah, I don't think we
and
should.
other
Yeah,
terms is that the term woman is a biological term and we can't create women, right? So it refers to some objective thing in the world. I mean, chair also refers so to an objective thing in the world. Um, but I mean, suppose that a person claimed, and so you gave the example of an electron. Suppose that a person said that an electron is just anything that's really small. Or they said an electron, it's part of an atom. That was their
right.
definition.
That wouldn't
And
work.
you said no, of course it's not part of an atom, because that would imply that protons and neutrons are electrons.
Right.
Um,
That we would agree that that would be a bad definition.
yeah, I would agree that that would be a bad definition.
And see, the
Um,
reason why I would say that that's a bad definition, you're not, and you would not agree with this, is because I would say you're not giving a definition of the thing, you're just listing traits that that thing has. And the reason why you won't agree with that is because that's exactly what you've done with woman. You don't define woman, you just list the traits of females. And then you say, all right, if you
I
have those
give
traits, you're a woman.
yeah. So I give a definition, but the definition is in terms of traits that something else has. But
Right. But it's
sorry.
in terms of traits of females.
Sorry.
That's important.
I haven't gotten to the question. So the question is, if a
All right.
person says that an electron is just a part of an atom, and you say no, that would imply that protons and neutrons are electrons. Do you agree that they should change their view? That they should say, oh, you're right, that's a counterexample to my
Yeah, they should change their view. Yeah, that's right.
okay,
That's
and can you explain why they should revise their view in response to the realization that their view implies that protons and neutrons are electrons?
in response to what?
in response to the realization that their definition implies that protons and neutrons are electrons.
Well, because we need to have a definition that accurately describes what an electron is, and their definition fails that test. It's very simple.
But
This isn't, we're not, we're, this isn't,
right, so
I think the reason why we're
can you
talking past
explain?
each
Sorry,
other,
can you explain why their definition fails the test? Like, how do you know that their definition doesn't accurately describe what it is? They've given a definition. Their definition objectively describes
their
each of
definition
the
is a
atoms.
small particle. Is that correct? Is that what you said?
Yeah, or it's a component of an atom. Let's say they go with that definition.
Okay, that's going to include a lot of things that aren't electrons, right?
So, and how do you know that those things aren't electrons?
What do you mean? How do I know that a proton is not an electron? See,
Yes.
this is exactly what I talk about. This is postmodernist
No.
soup.
No,
You're
no, no.
saying that
Sorry.
like,
Wait,
how
wait,
do you
wait,
know
wait.
that
No, no, no,
there's
no.
such a thing as an electron, and how do you know that there's
So,
even an
so
electron's not a
it's
proton?
not.
Like,
It's
so
not
now we don't know
postmodernist.
anything, and everything is anything
No, no.
because
I think we know lots of things. In fact,
do we
I
know that an electron is not a proton? Do we know that?
yes, yes.
Okay, so
I
then if
think
we have a definition that includes protons, that's how we know it's wrong. Pretty easy, pretty simple one
so.
there. We
So
know it's
David,
wrong because we know what
yeah.
electrons and protons are. Now, we
So
might have,
David,
on top of
David,
that, there's words that we use to
I think
describe
you're not.
them.
Yeah, I think you're not getting what I'm saying. So I agree with you that we
Yeah.
know that electrons are not the results. You know that electrons and protons and neutrons are correct. I'm not a postmodernist. I think we know all sorts of things about reality. What
Well,
I'm
then
saying is that
there's my
the
answer.
same.
That's my
What
answer for
I'm
you then.
sorry. Let me finish. Okay. What I'm saying is that the things that are how we know that the things that like the way that I think we know that an electron is not a proton, that the term electron doesn't pick out protons, is that if we rely on our linguistic intuitions, you know, if we rely on what people who are, you know what electrons are, how they refer to electrons, they don't use the term electron to refer to protons and neutrons. In other words, I rely on we rely on linguistic intuitions. But if you think linguistic intuitions are totally unreliable, and we shouldn't trust them in cases of things that are uncreated, well, then how do you go about determining that an electron is not a proton or a neutron? That the wrong definition of electron is just, you know, something really small or some component of an atom rather.
But we can test and know the difference between electrons and protons. And if your answer is, well,
But would
we
they?
should go with
Would,
what, go ahead.
well, what they would say in sorry, actually, what they would say in response is uh, that well, we know that there's a difference between you know protons and neutrons and you know things that other people call electrons. They say no, the right definition of electron is just you know any component of an atom. They're different. They're different components of atoms. But what the word electron means is just any component of an atom.
Right. Well, I mean, the thing is with woman, there are experts, scientists, biologists who would define it as an adult human female. But you're already begging the question by saying, no, woman means more than that. So we could do that here too. We could say, wait, we don't have to defer to these experts who tell us what electron means because, hey, electron, it can mean so much more than that. It can mean any small particle. And so what I'm saying is sometimes because there is a tether to reality, or another way to say that is this is just a term for describing a literal object in reality. This is not like a social construct, right? So for that reason, any definition that doesn't fit the reality, the substrate reality, isn't working. It's not a social construct here. But
Well,
the reason why
all right.
this
Well,
doesn't work with woman for you is because for you, woman is a social construct. And so it can mean anything that fits with our social usage. And if it changes tomorrow to include, I mean, it already has changed, in fact, to include, like trans also includes non-binary now. Okay, so if that's popular enough of a definition and people use it that way, then it includes that also, and it can just keep evolving like this forever. And that is how you are right. That is how words work. They do just evolve and take on new meanings forever. That is true, but not words that are tethered to scientific facts. It is important that
right.
electron continues to mean
So
electron
so
and doesn't
yeah.
also mean
So you say right. So your response is basically you say, look, electrons they're tethered to reality. They refer to a real thing in reality. But the point is,
right.
both definitions given of electrons make them refer to a real thing in reality. Components of components of particles exist. Okay, like you know, sorry,
Yes.
components of atoms exist. And so the
Yes.
question is, how do we go about determining which thing in reality the term electron refers to?
What do you mean? How do we choose which we have the word electron, and how do we choose which object to label it onto?
It's like how do you go about figuring out what things in reality the word electron refers to?
How do I personally? What is the question?
How ought one go about determining what the term electron means?
I mean, there are charge tests, that there are accelerator experiments that we could do if we really want to like
No, no,
identify
but
electrons.
no,
Is
no.
that
So
what you're talking about?
I'm not asking like scientifically. So I'm asking about what how you figure out what words mean, right? So like there are lots of things that uh or okay, fine. Here's maybe another example that I mean we could stick with the electron example, but here's maybe a better example. So suppose we're trying to figure out what the word tomato means, and someone says, oh, a tomato it's just a red thing that goes in salads. And you say, well, no, but an apple could go in a salad. An apple's a red thing. You agree,
Hmm.
presumably, that they should give up their definition, right?
Yes.
Right. And you agree that red things that go in salads, that red things that some people put in salads, these are parts of reality.
Yes.
Right. Okay. And so the question is, how do you go about determining that the word tomato doesn't refer to that bit of reality? It refers to
I
something
don't,
else.
but the thing is, I don't determine this. It's not as if I go about determining how things, this is why I find the question a little bit confusing.
When I
I
say
don't get
determining,
to
I just
determine
mean like I'm
what.
asking you in a custom. When I say determine, I don't mean like you're the one who made it. I'm just asking how you go about figuring out what things in reality it refers
Yeah, I'm still not clear on what you're saying. I mean, etymologically speaking, these words have, they have roots in history, but the object that, the object to which they apply. But like, why do we have a term for that? Or, I mean, what are you
to. I'm not
asking?
asking. I'm asking
We could
how do you
call it
figure
anything
out?
we want. We could call it like,
I'm what?
yeah, we could call it
What I'm
literally anything. It
asking.
doesn't have to be the word tomato. It could be literally anything.
What
It
I'm
doesn't
asking
matter.
is how do you figure out what bit of reality is picked out by the word tomato? Like how do you know
How do I
that?
figure out how something is a tomato and not something else?
No, I'm not asking how you figure out that something is a tomato. Given the definition of tomato is as it is, I'm asking how you go about figuring out what the term tomato means.
How do you go about figuring out what the term tomato means? You mean figuring out what is its definition?
Yeah.
You look it up in a dictionary. How's that?
Again, how do the dictionary writers figure out go about determining what the right definition is?
You ask botanists. They're the
Um,
experts.
and how do they determine who to ask?
How do they determine who to ask?
Like, why
I
ask
mean,
botanists rather? Why ask botanists
they're
rather than?
labeling, yeah, they're
Uh,
labeling the physical realities that they see in front of them. Like there are things called tomatoes. They are different in certain ways. We put a name on that. The name is, I mean, it's not entirely subject irrelevant, because it is there is an etymological history that kind of like
okay,
confines
I,
the options
I,
that word will be. It's not going to be banana. It was never going to be banana, right? It was going to be some variant of tomat something, and it ends up being tomato. Okay, fine. But like it seems like you're asking like why would we call it those phonemes? Why would we call it tomato and not
I'm not
some
asking.
other thing?
I'm not asking why we call it that. I'm asking how you go
Okay.
about figuring out what thing in reality is associated with the phone in tomato.
That's Wait, why do so yeah, so you're asking
Sorry,
like
I
why do
think
we end up, you are asking
I'm not
that.
asking like how we originally like decided on the term. I'm just asking how do you, a speaker of the English language, go about identifying what tomato, what the phoneme tomato, like what thing in reality it picks out. Like you didn't invent the
Experience.
term
You
tomato.
just so as someone who's like learning the English language, you just learn what other people call it, and then you're like, "Oh, this is the word for that thing." Like if you're an infant, you just learn from experience, this is the word for that thing. Of course, you could be
Right,
in an environment where you're taught the wrong words for things, and so
right.
going by
Same with
intuition is
you.
not a good way of figuring out what things literally are. So when you get older, you might want to look up the definition of tomato and see what its botanical definition is actually. But for everyday usage, the reason why you're going to call that red fruit a tomato is just because when you were a kid, you learned that's what that is from common usage of your social group around you.
Right, exactly. Right. So it's the way you go about figuring out that tomato refers to this kind of
Right.
plant
But that's
is
not
you
how you should
and
define it in a strict sense,
you go by
right?
common usage.
Yeah.
Well, what you want out of a definition in a strict sense is a definition that captures common usage, that identifies that the things that people commonly refer to as tomatoes are actually tomatoes.
Yes.
I should probably get going, um,
But people
but
don't commonly call trans women women less than, I mean, that's a minority. That's the thing you said at the beginning is like not true.
but
You're like,
sorry,
it's
do you
not common
remember
usage.
David? Do you remember my response to this point when you raised it several times?
Yeah, we went around and around a couple times. This has been a feature of the entire discussion. Unfortunately, well, you'll say something, I'll repeat it back to you, and then you'll say that's not what I said. And then later, I mean, this is why I said I had to pin the definition of woman at the top of this conversation because we've gone over this like 50 times, and every time I bring it up again, you're like, I don't know what you're talking about. That's not my position. And I'm like, I'm
I,
literally reading your words back to you.
I, I don't think any of the times when I've accused you of misquoting me, you've read the definition. You've just said that I think a woman is someone
I
referring
have
to
your
a
essay in front of me.
it's
I've read your words back to you every time.
it's always been in response to you saying something like, well, you think that what a woman is rooted in female in the word in what a female is sort of
And you
an
do.
ambiguous phrase like this.
And you do, and
But
I can read it to you word for
no,
word.
so the phrase rooted in is ambiguous. But I grant, yes, it's women
Okay.
with a significant
Well,
number of feminine traits. And in cases where you've said that,
fine.
I've not
I
agreed with you.
mean,
But sorry,
I think
I should get going. If I guess do you want to give like 2 minute closing statement or something? I can do that as well. Do you have any?
um yeah, that's a good idea. Well, I guess it's pretty simple. You can go if you want. It's makes no difference to me. Or you can choose who goes first if you like.
I don't really care.
Well, sure. It seems like when I read your essay the first time, all of the reasons that you were giving were things like, other than the science fiction case, which we've addressed here, but you would talk about like misgendering people or a trans woman going into a bathroom and, situations where your social intuition would be to sort of accept this person as a woman. And I think that is the case. Most people are not going to be having dinner with a trans woman and be like, you're not a woman, you're a man. That's just extremely rude for one thing. So, intuitions, yeah, I agree with you there, but that doesn't have anything to do with whether or not a trans, the phrase, the sent, trans women are women unless you start to warp the definition of woman to mean the thing that you're trying to prove in the first place, which will include trans women, which is essentially what I think you've been doing. So you define woman as rooted in the female. And let me be very clear what I mean by that. You define a woman as someone having a significant number of feminine traits. And what are feminine traits? You say they are traits of a female. So a woman is someone with a significant number of traits of a female. So someone who is like a female. So it is rooted in the female. And yet at the same time, you want to say that woman sort of just includes any of these, and we should go along with that because of what essentially comes down to social intuition slash ick factor of like, I don't want to be rude, I want to be respectful. So, we have these social norms. People are using the word in this way, although you seem to think that it's a common thing and it's actually less. It's like around 15% of the population would agree with the statement, a trans woman is a woman. So it's not actually that common. But just for the sake of argument, if we assume that it is common and everyone's going around saying that that's what a woman is, nevertheless, it doesn't mean that that's actually true. Just like if everyone goes around saying an electron is this or that, that doesn't mean that that's what that is. There's scientific definitions, and then there's the more social definitions. And you're making a social or semantic argument, which is fine. I'm not, that's fine. All I'm saying is if we can agree that these two things are different, uh, and you're like, yeah, sure, I agree that trans women are not females, but so for me, that's pretty much the ball. That's why I said at the beginning, that's the whole ball game right there. I mean, sure, trans women are not females. Trans women are women. If by women we mean non-females who identify as women, but we're going to pretend that they're women because of all of these social intuition, etiquette, rudeness, ick factors, what have you. Yes, I agree with all of that. So then I would agree trans women are women. Are you talking? Are you on mute?
Um, oh, sorry, yeah, I was talking. Yeah, so we've covered quite a few different points. Um, I think regarding the point about intuition, so my claim is not that we get intuition, that we get our definitions from like ik factors. My claim is that we get our definitions from how people think terms should be used, from our intuitions about how terms should be used. If we didn't do this, we would have no idea what any terms mean. The reason why we reject the definition of chair as a thing you sit on in response to hearing the counterexample of a spiked chair could still be a chair is that we see, look, that definition, it just doesn't fit with our intuitions about what a chair is. Um, in similar fashion, I think if we come upon counterexamples, cases of things that seem like women when we think about it, even upon reflection, that are not uh, adult human females, then we should say, look, the definition of woman is just not adult human females. When you have what you think is a good definition, and then you hear a counterexample, a case where it doesn't fit common linguistic intuitions, then it makes sense to give up the definition. Um, so no, I mean regarding this, the last like 45 minutes has been spent talking about this point. David had some things to say in response. As you see, I didn't think any of them were at all convincing. The reason why in my essay I mentioned normative considerations is I think there are normative considerations that are relevant to assessing whether or not the definitions of certain terms. So suppose we're arguing about the definition of the word priest. Well, you might think part of what's relevant to the definition of the word priest is like who has valid sacraments, right? So what you think is relevant, like part of what you think is relevant to what a woman is just who should, in various ways, be treated as a woman. So then, yeah. Now, uh, so I think David seems to agree that at least the definition I've given is one given that lots of people have. In which case, at least on one common definition of the word, it seems that trans women are women. And so then, if a person declares trans women are women, at least on one of the common definitions, they're not like speaking falsely. It's not like they're saying trans women are tomatoes. It's not like they're using some wildly out of bounds definition or saying some statement that's false given the right definition. So it seems at least people who say they aren't making a mistake, even on David's view, David's position, I think, has various implausibilities. If you interact with Blair White, it's really counterintuitive to think that Blair White is a man. Um, even knowing that Blair White is biologically male, this doesn't fit with our linguistic intuitions. Similarly, our intuitions about like Buck Angel. Buck Angel seems like a man um, rather than a woman, even though Buck Angel is biologically female. Um, yeah, I mean, the last point, so there was talk about what percentage of people think that a transgender woman is a woman. Um, I don't actually think that question's super well put because I think you could have a view on which some trans women are women, not all of them. I did just look it up. It looks like as of 2022, 43% of adults think someone's gender can differ from their sex assigned at birth. Seemed to be more than what was suggested, but but I don't think the exact number matters. What matters is, just like it doesn't matter when the definition of knowledge is not justified true belief. And we know that because that definition is falsified by the fact that there are lots of cases where a person has justified true belief. Everyone agrees they don't have knowledge. Uh, in similar fashion, it doesn't matter what percentage of people think the word woman means adult human female. What matters is people's linguistic intuitions about particular things in the world that are claimed to be women rather than about the word. So overall, I think the definition I've given is more plausible. And yeah. So I guess that's it. That's what I'll end on. Yeah. Thanks, David, for chatting about this. Hope this hasn't gotten
Before you
long.
go, I just wanted to say, thanks for an engaging and thoughtful debate, and also for the civility. This is one of those topics that you always see it gets heated. It's like debating the Middle East or something. And so I think we've both been that we were like cutting each other off and getting annoyed, but like it was a very civil and engaging debate, and that's a great thing. I'm always happy to see and to be a part of like a spirited exchange. Frankly, I think it's what our culture needs more of is the ability to like completely disagree with somebody, lock antlers, and still be respectful. So anyway, thanks for that. And I had a good time.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for doing this. Yeah, had a good time as well. All right.
Oh, and I wanted to
I
mention, sorry, I'm cutting you off again. You go, and then you go ahead.
oh no, yeah, I don't really have anything else to say.
Oh, I wanted to mention, unrelated, but I did read your essay on censorship, which had a line in it about the trans, but it also just generally speaking, you were just talking about censorship and what it's done to our society, and I thought that was a fantastic essay. So we have like 250 people in the room right now. I think people should check it out. That's a good essay. Anyway,
Thanks, I appreciate it. I unfortunately have not read others of your essays, so I don't have
that's
one in
fine.
hand, so I can say nice things about. But I'm sure some of your essays. So it's okay.
That's
I
fine.
did not read.
It was a pleasure.
But
Um,
yeah, nice meeting you. All right, have a nice rest of your day.
Ivan,
Yeah,
take
nice
care. Have a
doing
good
this.
weekend.
All right, bye.